Good evening. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Board of Education. Thank you very much. We will start with the roll call. Mrs. Walsh, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Colquist? Here. Ms. Collins? Here. Mr. Collins, I'm sorry. Ms. Conroy? Here. Mrs. Davy? Present. Mrs. Durrani? Here. Ms. Hirsch? Here. Mrs. Ostojic?
Present. 7 board members present, none absent. I will start with, we started our meeting this evening at 6:30. We had closed session discussion to consider employment of employee and the matter of student residency. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We're changing up a little bit the order of our meeting. At this point, typically we would take public comment. Tonight is also a workshop discussion. So we're going to start with an update from Dr. Krizik on the ongoing fiscal outlook discussion that we've been having over the past several meetings. Following that, board members will have a chance to ask their questions, and being a workshop topic, at that point, community members can come up and ask questions specific to the topic being presented. We have a second topic, facility fees, and then following, after the superintendent's agenda, we will have another opportunity for public, just to give public comments on anything that you'd like to speak to. We will leave the public comment sheet out and available for sign up until the superintendent starts her presentation for the consent agenda. Dr. Krizik?
Okay, are you timing me, Mrs. Geddes? Am I going to see the red button? No. Good evening. Good evening. As the next step in the process of discussing our fiscal outlook, we'd like to use tonight's meeting to provide an overview of some of the thoughts that went into putting together a fiscal plan that addressed the board goals of having a balanced budget, of having acceptable fund balances, and of avoiding the use of short-term borrowing. We took this work, our fiduciary work, very seriously. But this isn't the only work that we took seriously. We knew that in order to achieve the goal of having a balanced budget, we would be making some difficult choices, some difficult recommendations. Difficult because these choices and recommendations would affect individuals, would affect programs, and would affect beliefs. Some of these choices and recommendations were made even more difficult because they are not simple ones, simple to explain, sometimes not simple to understand. Of the many things that we have been reminded of in the last several months is that we have both a finite set of resources and a strong desire to continue to improve the outcomes for our students. These two goals are not necessarily competing goals or mutually exclusive goals, but they are goals requiring us now to begin to think differently about making decisions about how and where we allocate our resources. They are goals that are going to require us to ask the questions about what we value, and that require us to take a critical look at practices we have or don't have in place. Last but not least, they are goals that require us to better use data to inform our decisions. We are not unlike many school districts making reductions. However, some of these same school districts are using their existing resources differently in order to meet the needs of their students, in order to address their strategic initiatives, and in order to put systems and structures in place to enable them to achieve the vision they have for their students. A North Suburban high school district is making significant reductions, yet they are spending significant money to enable their students to have access to programs that embrace STEM, a program that integrates science, technology, engineering, and math. A unit district that is making reductions is adding positions to address their response to intervention implementation plan in order to provide their staff and their students with the support they believe will help improve student outcomes. And there's yet another unit district making reductions that are increasing their public relations budget as they realize they need to find other ways of reaching their constituencies and communities. Even in difficult economic climates, there are those districts that realize they need to find new, different ways of achieving their goals, even when their resources are reduced. Our community has asked us to live within our means. We intend to do this. We also intend to remain committed to using data to inform our decisions. We intend to be proactive to changes to educational standards and legislation. We intend to work toward improving our student outcomes, even if it means reevaluating valued programs or calling into question longstanding beliefs. We are not just seeking to keep pace or to outpace our benchmark school districts, we are seeking to set the pace. We possess a talented group of teachers and leaders. We have a community that values education, and we have students who come to school every day ready to learn and receive the benefits that go along with a unit school district education. These factors, combined with a shared commitment to and responsibility for continuous improvement, will be critical as we work to give our students the education they need for the 21st century. Over the course of the last few weeks, there have many that have asked, what were they thinking? Tonight, I would like to share with you some of our thinking. But first, I feel it's important to point out that the original $2.9 million budget reduction amount presented in early January was done so that the board had options as they sought to determine how best to address the district's fiscal goals, those goals of a balanced budget, 25% to 30% fund balances, and the avoidance of short-term borrowing. Today, we know the targeted amount is now $2,050,000. How we get to this amount has not yet been determined, but we know it will require fewer reductions than were originally projected. Although not everyone may agree with the rationale underlying the recommended reductions, new expenditures, or revenue enhancements, it's important that we try to just shed some light on just how, and in some cases why, we sought to reallocate our finite resources differently. We know that we have much work to do to continue to improve student outcomes, as well as close the gap for our students who do not perform at acceptable levels. Whether it is optimizing instructional time that we have available, providing our staff with the tools and resources needed to meet the learning needs and goals of students, or restructuring or replacing existing programs and practices, the decisions to be made in the future will require us to think differently, to use data differently, and to use our finite resources differently. This means that the conversation that began months ago will most likely be a conversation that will continue in this district for the next few months and the next few years. I'd like to now kind of walk through with all of you again, what some of this rationale was and what some of this thinking had been. So the goal for this evening is to provide a review of rationale for some of the new expenditures, to have a review of the rationale for some of the revenue enhancers, and then to provide a rationale for some key expenditure reductions. I know this evening that the Board of Education might ask additional questions about other options that might not be presented in this presentation, but we're choosing to go to those reduction options that have generated the most discussion and have generated the most questions from both staff and community members. And again, just as a reminder, on January 26th, the Board of Education established a reduction revenue enhancement level of $2,050,000. In one of the previous meetings, we had anticipated that there were 6 new education fund expenditures. This was a conservative presentation given to the Board of Education. One was the new middle school science adoption, estimated at approximately $185,000. The elementary science adoption in a subsequent year for $315,000. An elementary social studies adoption estimated at approximately $350,000. 8 full-time English as a second language certified staff for $480,000. 2 full-time equivalent psychologists to be hired over a 2-year period at a cost of approximately $160,000, and 0.5 world language or elementary Spanish staff at approximately $35,000. So I want to begin with talking a little bit about the rationale for why we're even proposing some curriculum adoptions. As some of you may or may not know, the district had adopted a 5-year curriculum adoption schedule in order to achieve 4 major goals, actually. 1, to better align major curriculum material changes to curriculum adoptions, to avoid issues with difficulties of finding replacement materials of items no longer being published, and that is currently what we have in some of our content areas. To implement a curriculum adoption process to better align K-12 instruction in this district, and then to be responsive to curriculum changes versus allowing resources to determine how and when curriculum changes will be implemented. When this district had limited resources, curriculum adoptions at the elementary and middle school levels were put on hold. And in some cases, there was a 10-year period between adoptions. There were unintended outcomes of that. The unintended outcomes is there weren't replacement materials. The gaps were filled in with a variety of different strategies, and sometimes what we lost in this unit district was the alignment of curriculum across the elementary schools and middle schools, again, because we didn't have the materials necessary to put in place. As part of the district's strategic plan, we did identify the 5-year curriculum adoption cycle. And this cycle provides some of the benefits that I outlined above, but it also enables us to make some course sequence changes between the middle school and high school. For the first time, I think we're taking a real serious look about the impact of adoptions between the middle school and the high school and what that may mean for our high school students and their future performance. We believe it's important to maintain this cycle. Waiting more than 5 years to address gaps in curriculum materials or to respond to changes in standards is not good practice. Additionally, the older curriculum materials become, the more difficult it is to find replacement materials. As an example, our elementary social studies materials are becoming difficult to find. Teacher editions are no longer available for middle school social studies, and health materials are no longer available for the publisher, based on the dates when those were adopted. We know the cost of each adoption varies. Putting placehold dollars in each annual budget for curriculum adoptions enables us to make good decisions. 2 years ago, we had a literacy adoption at the elementary level. That entire adoption cost approximately $1 million. If we didn't, if we weren't placeholding in the future, we would have to potentially not make the best decisions with regards to curriculum adoptions. We would never seek to implement 2 new curriculum in the elementary in the same year. However, the cost for those adoptions could occur in the same year because we could certainly be purchasing materials for implementation, hypothetically speaking, in the fall of 2010, with those bills being paid in July and August of 2010, 2011. And we may also have the following year, a social studies adoption. And again, those bills for that adoption might be paid in May and June of a given fiscal year. So in some cases, 2 adoptions could be paid in a single fiscal year, but there is no intention at the elementary level, knowing that elementary teachers teach all of the core content curriculum, to put all of those adoptions in a single year. We know that that would be unrealistic and certainly overwhelming. Here's our current reality. Our current reality is our elementary social studies textbooks were last implemented in 2003, 2004. And I don't know when the last time you guys checked, but a lot has changed in the past 6 years. Many things have changed, and I'm not so sure the current textbooks our teachers have are reflective of those changes, and in some cases are requiring our staff to seek supplemental materials in order to fill in the gaps. Our elementary science program, there's no textbooks currently associated with this program. Individual units have been updated. I don't want to say that it's not been sequenced. In some cases, it might be random. But there has not been a comprehensive look at all of the units done in quite some time. It's been done in pieces over the past several years. Our middle school social studies textbooks were last implemented in 2002, 2003. Our middle school science textbooks were last implemented in 2005, 2006, and someone might say, well, it's not even been 5 years. Well, it's almost 5 years. Next year will be the 2010, 2011 school year. But what we know from the science study is the implementation of the science curriculum will allow us to change the course sequence for students at the high school level, hopefully giving our students better outcomes when they take tests like the Prairie State and the ACT. In addition, it makes us more competitive and better alignment with our benchmark districts who have a sequence that has been recommended as part of the science study. And the elementary textbooks were last implemented in 2003, 2004. In addition to our current reality, we have a future reality that we need to be concerned about. We know that there will be new Common Core standards in both literacy and math to be adopted statewide in 2010. For those of you who were at a previous meeting, you know there's been a discussion about Race to the Top. But in addition to Race to the Top, the state of Illinois has embraced the Common Core learning standards in literacy and math, and those will be published sometimes in 2010. Those will, in some cases, affect what our curriculum looks like, because the standards as we know them today will be different. There may not be more standards, they might be more focused standards. And so it might potentially change how we deliver instruction and or the instructional materials that we need to deliver that instruction. We also know that there are going to be some significant changes on how students will be assessed. It could be as early as 2013. So the assessments that we know today, ISAT and PSAE, may not look like that anymore because they would need to be realigned with the new Common Core standards in both literacy and math. And so as a district, not only do we have to try to plan for our current reality and deal with the issues of our current reality, we also need to be forward thinking and be looking at what our future reality is, which is why we believe it justifies continuing to have placeholder dollars for curriculum in future years in this budget, whether they are expended or not in that budget year, because it will be not expending them for the sake of expending them, but by putting a process in place to ensure that we're using them wisely. With regards to rationale for additional staff, I'm going to break these down. There were three. It was the English as a second language staff, it was psychologists, and it was world language Spanish elementary. As of January, this past January in 2010, we have 340 students identified as needing ESL services. In moving to a model where the delivery of instruction is to be provided by a certified ESL or bilingual teacher, we will be moving toward a model that reflects compliance regulations and will ensure that we are able to receive any available state or federal dollars. Any district not in compliance with state or federal regulation forfeits any monies that are available to them. But regardless of whether these funds are available or not, we are seeking not only to be in compliance, but to put in place best practices in order to work towards closing the gap, the learning gap, of our English as a second language learners, which were one of the subgroups that did not meet AYP at the district level. It is possible that this is a subgroup that will not meet AYP at various school levels this year or next year. With regards to the addition of 2 psychologists over the course of the next 2 years, the mandate for the implementation of response to intervention, or RTI, in the fall of 2010 requires a change in the role of school psychologist from one of that of a diagnostician placing students in special education to a leader in the progress monitoring, the integration of data in team decision making. Where RTI models have been faithfully implemented, psychologists spend more time in general education and spend less time on eligibility assessment activities. Our financial ability to provide external RTI coaching through the Special Education Joint Agreement SACID will expire when ARRA funds are exhausted in the fall of 2011. The 2010-2011 school year would be our opportunity to begin to develop capacity in our schools to provide this mandated process with our psychologists taking the lead. We currently have 6.5 psychologists for 8,000 students. If one also looked to the standards set by the National School Psychology Association, they would recommend a standard of 1 psychologist for every 1,000 students. Again, our driver on this is not just to meet the student-staff ratio, but to be able to be proactive in putting systems and structures in place to operationalize RTI as best as possible. In the area of world language, elementary Spanish, we currently have 7.3 full-time equivalent elementary Spanish teacher. Each full-time Spanish teacher teaches 15 to 17 sections. 3 new grade level sections in grades 2 through 5 in the upcoming school year means there would be enough new sections requiring an additional 0.5 staff member if we continue to provide our 2nd and 3rd grade students with 15 minutes of world language instruction 4 times per week and 20 minutes of world language instruction 4 times per week for our 4th and 5th graders. So that is the rationale justifying the addition of the 8 FTE ELL teachers, the 2 psychologists, and the 0.5 ELL teacher. When we looked at revenue enhancements, we looked at what current fees we have in place. Many have indicated that they'd be willing to, increase, have increases to our student fees. My response to that is this board has always prided itself in being able to have a direct link between how fees were generated and developed and what they look like. And so by arbitrarily adding on our general student fees would be a shift in that way of thinking. One of the revenue enhancement options that was recommended was a $35 technology fee to elementary and middle school students. We have had, as you know, a significant amount of technology infused into our elementary and middle schools over the past 2 years, primarily related to curriculum adoptions, but also because that was just part of the technology implementation plan that had been outlined by David Smith. Currently, that fee is $30 at the high school, and we are looking to increase that fee to $35 for next year. As a district, we spend approximately $430 per student. If you took our technology budget, divided it by the number of students served, it's approximately $430 per student that we're spending on an annual basis, with with a significant portion of that budget, or a part of that budget, of recurring expenses. The elimination of the early registration fee, as those of you who are parents who used the online program last year, in order to acclimate people to online registration and move away from all of the paper, we chose to put in an incentive practice, and that was that there would have been a 10% reduction if fees, correct, Mrs. Masterton? 10%, if fees were paid by a designated date. We want to move away from that, as you all have been incredible at transitioning to that, because that represented $101,470. And again, as I had said earlier, those fees are directly connected to the cost of materials and supplies that students are using. So these are not arbitrary fees. So that was a $101,000 that the district used, obviously, of other resources in order to do those. So we're looking to remove that early registration fee. The third piece is remarketing retired technology equipment. And it might be a little aggressive to think that we could, on an annual basis, achieve $5,000 in new revenue, but it's possible that it could be up to $5,000. This would be an opportunity for the district to capture the residual value of equipment that is no longer operational and enables the district to document the proper disposal of the equipment. With regards to fees to increase or add to the operations and maintenance budget, we would be proposing moderate fees to increases to the facility fees. It would allow the district to capture costs incurred for making its facilities available, and it would allow us to use 2010 costs versus the 1981 costs as a fee development framework that is currently in operation. So later on, after my presentation, Ms. Masterton will talk a little bit more about the structure and framework, the facility fees, and how our fees even compare to some of our surrounding school districts and what the plans for that is. Since our last couple meetings, we've looked at 2 additional revenue enhancement options. One is increasing the elementary and middle school band orchestra fee. Currently, the cost of our elementary and middle school band orchestra and vocal music programs is approximately $600,000. This represents staff costs and supply costs. It doesn't include transportation costs. The increase in this fee would assist in offsetting the cost of this program. A suggested fee is $150 for band and orchestra. It's a fee currently at $117.50, and $65 for vocal music, which is currently $51.50. The possible new revenue from this revenue enhancement is approximately $42,000. Just to give you some perspective, we currently have 617 students in our elementary band and orchestra program, 391 in our middle school band and orchestra program, and 309 students in our middle school vocal music program. Our budget projects that our current budget has us receiving revenue this year of approximately $110,000 from fees, which represents 18.5% of the cost of the program. The per pupil cost, if we did it that way, is approximately $455.58 per person. Again, these are programs that run all year long with very few days off for kids that are in these programs. The other additional revenue enhancement option was adding an extracurricular club fee. Currently, there is no charge for students to participate in extracurricular clubs. The current cost to operate those clubs is $100,000. That only includes staff personnel costs. That does not include supply costs or transportation costs. The increase in this fee, or the addition of this fee, would certainly assist in offsetting the cost of clubs at the elementary, middle school, and high school levels. The suggested fee is $10, and that potentially would generate $30,000 in revenue. Currently, there are 7 clubs at each elementary school, 8 clubs, 1 newspaper, 1 yearbook, 3 student councils, and intramurals at the high school, and 62 clubs at the high school. The cost, again, of the extracurricular program, the $100,000, only reflects stipend or salary costs and does not include any costs for supplies and/or for transportation. So when we look at updating our revenue enhancement total from the prior meeting to this meeting, a $35 technology fee for elementary and middle school potentially could generate $194,600. The elimination of the early registration fee would generate $101,470. Remarketing of retired technology equipment could be up to $5,000. The increase in the elementary and middle school band, orchestra, vocal music fees would be an additional $42,000. And the extracurricular club fee would be approximately $30,000. Increases to the operation and maintenance fund through increases to facility fees could potentially generate $168,200 for an overall total new revenue of $574,270. So now I kind of want to move from the revenue enhancements to the expenditure reductions. I'm going to start with class size. Talk a little bit about class size. Many educators in the room and many parents in the room are very familiar with the STAR class size study. It was a huge study. It's well documented. But this study basically made its recommendations based on class sizes of 15 to 20 students, where they identified that there was substantial outcomes when class sizes range from 15 to 20 students. But it wasn't class size alone, it was the teaching strategies combined with the class size that were equally important. There is no extrapolation of 15 to 20 to any other number, because as part of this study, they also looked at class sizes that ranged up to 30 students. There currently is, in the body of research with regards to class size, contradictory evidence with regards to the impact of smaller class size as a strategy to improve student achievement. While there might be some slight advantages to the early grades as a singular strategy, again, the research is mixed as in terms of enhancing student achievement. And if we go back to the STAR study, it would be a class size of 15 to 20 that would yield some differing outcomes for students, again, particularly at the early grade level. We've learned through a lot of our assessment work this year that the effect of a comprehensive assessment for learning program on achievement has 4 to 5 times greater the effect than reduced class size. So what does that mean? What that means is by being able to effectively use assessment and/or data to make instructional change or improvements is a far more effective strategy in improving student outcomes than using class size alone as a strategy. In the reduction options that had been identified earlier, we sought to maintain the class size of 24 in grades K1 and 2. Again, looking at those as being the earliest grades, and again, unfairly generalizing the STAR study to those grade levels, because there's a huge difference between 15 and 20 and 24 students. When we looked at the district's class size average, when I say the district, when I look at the number of students in each grade level and the number of sections that we have in each grade level, our overall class size numbers, so to speak, when you look at it from that perspective, is significantly lower than 24. Kindergarten is 19.4, first grade is 21.1, second is 20.5, third grade is 21, fourth grade 21, and fifth grade 18.7. And this data point is important because when we compare our student class sizes to our key benchmark districts, and I know that that chart's hard to read, but most of you have a copy of the PowerPoint, yes? When you look at that and you look at what their average class sizes are, you know that those averages, that there are classes with higher numbers of students as well as lower number of students in order to get to that average class size. As a district, Elmhurst ranks as having the lowest district class size. The inference there is our school-based class sizes are also lower than our comparable districts. And we look at that for a variety of reasons, because if there is some indication that small class size at the early grade levels has an impact on achievement, then as we look at students go through the system and we look at where they perform at key points in the system, then we would expect that our outcomes to be at or higher than some of our benchmark unit school districts. Currently, the data doesn't bear that out at this point in time. So as an instructional strategy of advancing student achievement, it may not be the strategy that's most effective in advancing the outcomes for our students. And again, the data source that I put up there is for the 2008-2009 school year. When we looked at world language, the elementary Spanish program, I need to start out by saying that we always understood the value of second language acquisition. That was not an issue. That wasn't what was being debated amongst us. When we looked at our benchmark districts, we saw that only 1 out of 7 of our benchmark districts provided world language at the elementary level. And that was Batavia, and they started earlier. They started in kindergarten. But the other benchmark districts of Wheaton, Indian Prairie, Barrington, Naperville, St. Charles, and Geneva started, some started in 6th grade, some started in 8th grade, and some started in 9th grade. So we looked at, so what does that mean for them and what does that mean for us? We also sought, when we looked at the elementary Spanish program, was there a way of increasing instructional time in the content areas in order to be at or above the state averages, not only at the state averages, but with our key benchmark districts in DuPage County? The length of the instructional day in our benchmark districts ranges from 6 hours a day to 5¼ hours per day. We're 5 hours and 30 minutes per day. Now, with the exception of one district that's at 5 hours and 35 minutes, none of those other districts, all of those districts are able to use that time for core instruction: social studies, science, reading, literacy, and math. Certainly the arts. Mostly everyone has, obviously, a physical education program. They provide health, and they provide music and art as well. And so we thought, wow, maybe some of the outcomes that they're getting in students is because they're able to spend more time in delivering instruction in the content areas. Maybe they're better able to implement some of their curriculum with fidelity and integrity as recommended by the publisher who is providing some of the curriculum materials. We also sought when we looked at elementary Spanish as not including it in our elementary experience, was to better enable block scheduling and flexible grouping, and again, as a means of improving student achievement. We have had a lot of conversations recently that if we blocked literacy instruction or if we blocked math instruction and we used assessment, that every 6 to 8 weeks students would move between groups and their needs would best be met. We can do that if we're able to block the schedule. And so, you know, again, understanding the value of the elementary Spanish program, those 15 and 20-minute blocks are making it challenging for us to do those blocks in both literacy and math at all of our schools. It doesn't mean that we don't have some of those blocks now, we do, but we currently haven't optimized those blocks fully in terms of the implementation of flexible grouping, which is something that we are looking to have for the next school year. And last but not least, we don't have any data. We have no data to determine what the impact of the elementary Spanish program is. And I say that to you, you know, both honestly and candidly, because without the use of data, it is hard to determine whether or not there is or is not value to a program in terms of what it means to a student world language outcomes in 6 through 8, how it manifests itself throughout the high school, and or any correlation it may or may not have to student achievement. So those were the things that we looked at. Again, what I don't want to get lost was we understood the value of second language acquisition, but we were also looking at trying to put in place some instructional strategies to advance student achievement, to stay with that vision of continuous learning, continuous improvement, to give our teachers some flexibility with the utilization of some additional instructional strategies through the use of block scheduling and flexible grouping. And so there are some additional considerations we can have from a going forward point. We certainly have an opportunity to restructure the program. Restructuring could mean thinking differently about when this program is offered, about what grade levels are served, or about how grade levels are served. This work would need to be done over the course of the next couple months with recommendations to come forth in April, maybe no later than May, but hopefully in April. But regardless of what recommendation comes forth, there needs to be a plan that evaluates the program, because that's both critical and necessary in order to be able to continue to justify a program that we believe might be important. How do we know if it's making a difference? And again, while tonight I'm not talking about what restructuring could look like, I'm putting out on the table that responsibility will be given to, you know, Connie Chester and staff to continue to look at ways of looking at that differently. One is to try to also help us achieve the ability of creating a block schedule. How can we do that in a way where those things potentially coexist and complement with one another? And if we provided it during the day, and or if we looked at it providing it outside of the school day. Again, not sure what restructuring might look like. When we looked at restructuring health services, just as we have valued our, we value world language instruction, we value all of our employees, including the health aides. And so nothing in the recommendation of restructuring was intended to communicate otherwise. The model of having a full-time nurse, a school nurse in each building, is a model that's already in place at York. The restructuring of the health services sought to replicate this model at all of our schools, as the majority of students that enter York would have come from our elementary and middle schools. This is a model that has been effective at York. It has worked at York. And so our desire was also to ensure that we have decreased liability and prevent additional expenditures in the future. Students in every school receive medications. Some medications are more invasive than others, and some require that a certified medical person evaluate the effect of the medication. Whether this is 1 student or 5 students, it would require the evaluation of the effect of the medication. We currently have 6 certified school nurses and 4 registered nurses on staff, in addition to our 12 health aides. And as part of our contract with Elmhurst Hospital, we pay the salaries and a prorated portion of the hospital's cost of the health benefits. In the 3rd year of the contract, we will pay the salaries plus 100% of the hospital's cost of the health benefits provided to these employees. The cost of the salaries of the certified nurses is offset by personnel reimbursement that we receive on an annual basis, which is approximately $9,000 per year. Additionally, school nurses and registered nurses can generate additional Medicaid reimbursement to the district, a revenue source that also helps us to offset the cost of our health services. We currently receive and are not allowed to receive any reimbursement for health aides, and they are also not able to submit Medicaid claims. We understood from the beginning when we discussed this that this restructuring would have meant evaluating job responsibilities of the nurse, the office aide, and the school secretary. We were going to look to see whether there were any redundancies, opportunities for efficiencies, but again, how could we continue to provide the same high quality level of service on a variety of different dimensions? Again, doing the work differently than we were doing it before. So, in summary, our desire was to proactively address some of the increasing complex health issues without creating additional nursing costs, to have decreased liability, understanding we would have diminished savings over time. While this recommendation had a savings initially, over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, those savings would be diminished over time. And that we also knew that the larger number of nurses, whether we asked Elmhurst Hospital to seek school nurses or registered nurses, we knew that we would be generating additional Medicaid reimbursement. Again, in the implementation, we would have worked again closely with all of our staff and talked about what the implications of those were. The next option that was discussed at a prior meeting was the restructuring of guidance. And we could say that this is a really good thing, that the guidance class structure that we currently have is unique to District 205. There are very few middle schools and/or junior highs that offer guidance as a class to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students. When we looked at this, we sought to create a student staff allocation that was somewhat consistent with the National School Counselor Association standards. They recommend 250 to 1, although if you look at their website, they say in reality it's more like 400 and something to 1. And so we sought to be somewhat equitable throughout the district as it was related to that. Our current staff student allocation range from 147 students to 1 counselor to 244 students to 1 counselor. So again, we were trying to look at a little bit of equity to some extent. We thought, or we believed, that in removing guidance class from the counselor's time, their time could be more focused on individual and small groups. The impact of that would be different at the different schools. It would be different between Sandburg, Bryan, and Churchville, giving the Sandburg guidance counselors even more access to students for individuals and small groups in some extent than the other 2 schools. We knew that by removing guidance from the Unified Arts sequence, that it would increase the amount of time for the other 5 remaining courses in 6th and 7th grade. And we knew it would potentially require us to revisit the 8th grade Unified Arts option sequence in both structure, time, and options. And last but not least, that it would require some shifting of the guidance curriculum to some other areas. For example, currently there's a health component, a sex education component that is taught in guidance. Whether that was taught in health or whether there was another opportunity for that to be taught, again, that was work to be done. So we knew that in presenting this restructuring guidance option, that there were implementation opportunities that we needed to take a look at. So for the point that we're at now, one is I tried again, I wanted to just highlight what some of our new education fund expenditures were and why, what some of the revenue enhancers were and why, and what some of the reduction options were and why. And so going forth in this presentation, we've used the education fund budget as a framework. And for those of you that are not thoroughly familiar with school finance, it's a complicated system. It's hard to follow, it's hard to understand, and sometimes the logic is just doesn't make very much sense. But to say it simply, money that is in the education fund is used for instruction, and it's used for technology and library services, and summer school and support services, as well as executive administration, business services, and health services and support, and extracurricular. The education fund comprises the significant amount of expenses in our overall district-wide budget. And so using it as a framework, we've placed the initial reduction option strategies that were presented to the board into 9 different categories. And although there has yet to be careful, thoughtful public discussion on the reduction options, what we've done is to try to highlight, do I need to move this? To highlight the reduction options as a way of showing the board how they might possibly meet their $2,050,000 target that was established at the last meeting. And so everything that's highlighted in yellow would be something that would be considered as a reduction option. And on this first page, all of the items related to reductions in executive services and school administration are highlighted. All of the reductions related to business services are highlighted, and I'll talk about that in a second. And all of the reduction options related to curriculum and instruction, technology, and library services are also highlighted. There have been 2 changes. There are 2 changes to what is up there to what was presented previously. One is that in the original reduction options, we had reduced 2 library assistants at the high school. In this option model, we have only eliminating 1. There's currently an unfilled position, and so it would be not filling the unfilled position. And the second was the energy conservation position, a position that is paid out of 2 budgets, but the operations and maintenance budget as well as the education budget. And what we have put up here for this evening is to reduce this position by 50% in order to assist with the transitioning of these responsibilities to identified staff over a year and a half period. So it is maintaining some structure of that position for 1 year and then providing the appropriate training and transitioning. And as we know, having some seamless transition between services can sometimes be important to maintain the cost efficiencies that we have received over the past few years. As it relates in continuing talking about these reduction options, the next 6 categories are instruction, direct instruction, health services and special support, extracurricular, indirect instruction expenses, which is indirect, summer school reach, and the bilingual program. And what you see here is that in health services, nothing has been highlighted for purposes of what the administration is putting forward. And in the direct instruction, the only item that is highlighted is the reduction of positions at the high school, and the change there is originally it was 3.5 FTE positions, and what we have up there is a reduction of 2 full-time positions at the high school for next year. When we look at extracurricular, we've only highlighted 3 areas: reducing athletic scouting costs, reducing extra supervision stipends at the high school, and delaying the purchase of the uniforms. As it relates to indirect instruction, we've highlighted reducing cafeteria supervision and reducing paper copying costs at the high school. Again, one of those would be considered an operational efficiency. Under summer school reach, it is reducing the OLSAT costs. Again, as we have never talked about, this is not eliminating our use of the OLSAT as a tool in the identification of students evidencing giftedness. But it is not using it as the screening tool for students in the identification process of giftedness. And then the restructuring support for English as a second language, We have that highlighted up there. We currently know that most of our many of our bilingual aides are also reading assistants. And we need a process of figuring out what percentage of their time is allocated to being a reading assistant and what percentage of their time is allocated to being a bilingual or an English as a second language assistant. And so while it's highlighted there potentially not as a recommended reduction, there will be some change there. We just don't know the amount. And so I just chose to be general there as opposed to not highlighting it to either way, I'm just using caution with regards to what that means by having that highlighted. In looking at the operation and maintenance fund reductions, we've highlighted everything. Again, reducing the energy conservation position by 50%. I just addressed that earlier. To participate in the energy management program with ComEd, that is basically entering into an agreement with ComEd. It has to do with, in the event of there being a brownout in the summer months, of our need to shut schools down or work warmly, and then a reduction of one position in the custodial maintenance group. So when you look at this from a dollar figure perspective, you see that this grouping of options, and again, I want to underscore, the board has not discussed this, they've not made these decisions, they've not supported these, they've not done any of these things. It's just a framework. When we look at this framework, we see that $165,500 is a reduction out of direct instruction costs, direct and indirect. Extracurricular is a little over 17,000. Health services support is nothing. Bilingual, approximately 75,000. Curriculum and instruction, technology and library services, 745,000. Summer school reach, 12,000. Executive services and school administration is 459,000 plus. Business services, 12,140. And out of the O&M fund, it's 78,500 for a total of little over $1.5 million. So when we look at the overall summary, what we see is just to kind of give you a sense of what it might look like to get to a little over $2 million. 3/4 of this would be coming out of reduction options. 1/4 of this would be coming out of revenue enhancements. And this particular scenario that we have just put out there for discussion purposes only, subtotals to be $2.1 million, which is just slightly higher than the $2,050,000 that was set at the last level. And as those of you who were here at the last level, the board really only had 3 numbers to choose from, and they weren't, navigating numbers. But the way the discussion went is that would be the minimum that they would set, and maybe they would go 1 penny over, maybe they wouldn't go 1 penny over, but it just gave them a framework for making that decision. So the next steps in the process, and some of these would happen simultaneously, and some of them have already happened, so they're not necessarily completely in a sequence. And that is that the board will discuss the revenue options and revenue enhancements. The board has received all of the feedback that has been submitted online, either directly through me. Staff would have sent it linked to me, and so they got copies of those emails sent to me, as well as all what was put on the community feedback form. So they have to integrate all of that. We still have a March 9th timeline to have them approve the reduction options and revenue enhancements that will affect the 2010-2011 budget. But something that we intend to talk with the board at a future meeting is that we need to, as a district, develop and put in and conduct what we want to refer to as an educational program review process, a process that would occur on an annual basis for all programs and services that we do. There are several models out there that some districts are using successfully. So when it comes to times like this, they already have a process in place to be able to evaluate the impact, the value, the impact that these programs are having, and if there is no data to support the impact of certain pieces, then that's taken into consideration as they make their recommendations coming forth. But we do believe it's time that we too put into effect a comprehensive educational program review process, so that this process becomes slightly less painful in the future. And I only say slightly less painful because there is nothing easy about making recommendations for reductions at any level, and from no matter where we sit. We, again, take this incredibly seriously. So that would be the next step in the process, something to be developed potentially over the course of the summer and in the fall. We will not have this in, we will not have this in place. If anyone is thinking, can I have this in place by the next board meeting? It's a lot of work, and we have to conceptualize it, but some of our benchmark districts have this in place, and they've been used very effectively. And so we think, too, it's a good quality tool for us to use. So that is the overview that I wanted to lay out for both the board and for the public. And at this point in time, if you would like to ask questions now or wait for Ms. Masterton's questions with regards to facility fees, Ms. Ostojic, what would be the pleasure of the board?
I think the facility fee is a more narrow area, so we'll go ahead and have conversation about this. And I will make the comment that you said the board has not had any discussion on any of this, and that was by intent.
Correct.
What we wanted to do was have the opportunity for the community to see the things that were out there, to get input from the community. And thank you, your team has done a great job of not summarizing, but aggregating all of the community input. If my count is right, between the emails we received and the feedback link and the people that have addressed us up to this point, it's in excess of 500 people that we've gotten input from. So we've gotten a great deal of input. So with that, I would like to open this up for the board to ask questions, comments on Dr. Krizik's presentation on the specific items that have been laid out at this point for our deliberation.
The red light, time's up. No. Do you think?
I'm going to give board members a chance to put their thoughts together. I will ask you a question. We've received a great deal of feedback from the community on various topics, and also throwing out some additional things that weren't put out there. Can you talk a little bit about how the information we have received has impacted your recommendations?
In reading a lot of the feedback, we know that a variety of these, I'll say, reduction options that people are polarized on. On both sides of the issue. Elementary Spanish is one, class size is one. But I think in reading some of those things, because we didn't yet have the opportunity to kind of lay out some rationale or what we were expecting to achieve with some of these options, I think that you know, that perspective wasn't reflected in all of the comments. So hopefully now everyone has the benefit of hearing those comments. We also saw, Mrs. Ostojic, that there were a number of individuals that, you know, applauded the board for working to live within its means, and that applauded that you sought to have a balanced budget and to meet your fiscal goals. And while they recognized how difficult and challenging it was going to be for all of you to make those decisions, you know, that overarching feedback was also there. There was feedback, a willingness of individuals to have, let's say, a pay-for-fee for services that went beyond the scope of the core curriculum. Again, that would speak to the extracurriculars, whether that's clubs or, you know, athletics or band, orchestra, and music. We certainly saw that. We saw that, you know, the community was asking for, you know, reductions of staff salaries across the board. It wasn't just administrative salaries, it was teacher salaries, it was custodial salaries, it was support staff salaries. So we certainly saw a stream of feedback with regard to that people didn't differentiate with regards to that in terms of a revenue reduction. We saw you know, feedback about health services, certainly a great deal of support for health aides and the services that they provide. Again, we didn't have the opportunity to lay out what we are seeking to accomplish, but again, it was obvious from the feedback that, you know, staff have endeared themselves to this community, have endeared themselves to kids and to parents as well. So we certainly saw that as part of the feedback. We certainly saw that they wanted reductions across all levels, not only in elementary at the expense of middle school or high school, but no level at the expense of any other level, but for us to take a look at reductions across all of the levels. Certainly there was a desire to, you know, have reductions taken at the administrative level. Again, without laying out what percentage of our budget, of the education fund budget, is equivalent to administrative and business services, which is a little over 10%, Ms. Masterton. The other 90% represents those other areas that I was talking about. So in a, you know, 60-something million budget for the education fund, I should have that in front of me, 70, in a you know, a $70 million education budget, approximately 10% of the budget is accounts for administrative costs and business services. And administrative costs include a variety of things. It's not just salaries. It's services, it's software, it's technology, it's legal services, it's a variety of subscription services, it's professional, there's professional development, there's a lot of things that go into that. So we saw feedback across the whole you know, the whole perspective. With regard to class size, we saw some people suggest that they would support class size increases at grades 4 and 5. Could we leave third grade alone? Could we keep the 24 at K1, 2, and 3? Again, I'm going to, because there were more than 500 entries, I'm going to do some disservice. But I do think on some of the key issues, some of the issues that I talked to about tonight, that's probably where we saw the most amount of feedback. I didn't see any non-support for new curriculum materials. I didn't see that thread running rampant throughout any of the feedback. But those are some of the key things that we saw. Again, I'm doing disservice because I'm not delineating the full substance of all of the feedback comments.
Mrs. Davy.
Dr. Krizek, I'd like to thank you and your staff for the work that has gone, the thoughtful work that has gone into this. I want to talk a little bit about the process with you. First of all, you know, we've heard tonight, and I think it's worth repeating that we received every word of every comment made by members of the community. And I can justify that by saying I now have 2 pairs of glasses because there was so much reading to do, and it was small font because, you know, you tried to condense it for us, but it was very important for us to hear what a segment of our community values. We didn't hear from the whole community, but we all obviously heard from the segment of community that has a vested interest in this process. So we got really good information, and I think you were able to use that, and that becomes one prong of the process of getting information to come to where we are at the table now. Another prong, though, is you, as you did your presentation, talked about we. This wasn't a you, this was a we. And I wonder if you could just delineate who you brought in to your conversations to, you know, make these educational decisions as you did. That's part one. And then part two is, because you've now eliminated some of the items that your team had originally first, you know, sought to bring forward, is your team on board? Are they accepting of the compromises that you're bringing to us, and without thinking that they are compromising at the risk of any educational advancement that we may be making?
Great questions. The process of the we is that this process started late in the fall, when Ms. Masterton asked each of the building principals to first go back into their budgets and make reductions out of their school budgets. They chose, the elementary and middle school principals then chose to work as a group. Elementary worked as a group, middle school worked as a group, and obviously high school is one person. But Diana also worked with her staff, you know, in terms of getting some feedback, because there were some certainly athletic recommendations and some other pieces to this that would have required her to receive, you know, some feedback from her staff. And so what we asked them to do was to generate a possible list of expenditure reduction options. And that list far exceeded the $2.9 million that we had put together, far exceeded that. So when we looked at that list, we looked at which of those things could achieve some other strategic objectives for us, i.e., putting other systems and structures in place and what was necessary. So we took that list, the cabinet then took that list, and we organized it by various pieces, totaled it up, and we did share this, obviously, with all of the administrators before it was even shared with you. So they saw what finally made the list. Certainly amongst all of the principals, they all have different, you know, there were some things that did not come up on the list that they thought could have come up on the list. But again, this was the consensus that we received from them, and we put that together. So that was that process, and then it came to cabinet. We too took a high level in terms of how it affected just administrative services, because the building principals were looking at what was happening close to instruction in their buildings and what was happening in their schools. That's the first part of the process. As it relates to the options that are up there, you know, I don't think I would be speaking out of turn for some of my staff, both at the school instructional level, principal level, and/or cabinet level, of a reluctance to put on hold the Director of Research and Quality Assessment position. There is a perception in this district that, well, data exists in a variety of different places and we can just get it. What we realized in this process is we don't have data centralized in a location. We are not able to look at trend data. We're pulling it from a variety of different sources. No one has that responsibility for integrating all of it and giving it to staff. And going forward, our expectations for using data more at both the instructional level as well as the programmatic decision-making level is even more significant. And as reluctant as we are to put that position on hold, we also do not want to bring a staff member in here for a year, and if we face additional reductions, have that be perceived as that needs to be the first thing to go, because I don't know if in 1 year you will totally see the impact that could have organizationally. And so we don't want to do that to anybody's life, and we also don't want to get started on something and then have to abandon it. So we haven't yet figured out how we're going to try to do that work here. But just really in the last few days, it just came to fruition how frustrating it is for us, but for our building principals and also for our staff, not to have all this information connected and or presented in a way that's understandable. So of the things, I would say that is probably the most significant piece. Again, as it related to the strategic objectives of increasing instructional time and providing block scheduling, if there is a way to do some outside of the box thinking as it relates to the elementary Spanish program and we can accomplish multiple objectives, that's great. But again, I guess our underlying goal, Mrs. Davy, is to try to put in some, again, structures and systems in place that we know are somewhat research-based, that we know can have positive outcomes on students. But I don't think that there's anything on there that is a live or die for us on the list. It isn't that. We just, again, we've had the opportunity to digest this and look at this. And again, it is a perspective. And as I said earlier, not everybody's going to agree with the rationale that I put forward, that I shared with all of you this evening. But it is meant to just shed some light on some of the decisions.
Mrs. Deroney?
Is it your intention to try to restructure the elementary foreign language program by the fall?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer for that. So I know that That's going to require a significant amount of work led by Mrs. Chester, and I won't speak for her or her thinking. But we don't want to do any major changes to any program if this gets revisited in a year or two. It's unfair to the staff, it's unfair to the program. So what that looks like, I don't know what that looks like. You know, to Mrs. Osijek's point, we certainly had people say, you know, use some outside of the box thinking. Here's some other ideas for doing, you know, certain things. So as you know, under, you know, Dr. Sullivan's leadership working with Mrs. Chester, I think that we're going to want to be able to have them generate a variety of different options and solutions and what that might look like. Again, if this comes back again, if next year we are facing needing to make significant reductions again, I'm going to say some of the same things that were here are going to reoccur again, and you don't want to go through an entire process of restructuring something only to have it undone again. So, you know, I'm just going to tread lightly on answering that question. I think if we could at least minimally achieve the objective of how to restructure, to schedule, to better optimize instructional time, if at least that is achieved, with also including some data mechanism in next year, maybe that's all that gets accomplished. I'm not going to set the bar too low for her, because she's the person that reaches a high bar, but I don't have an answer for that, and I won't know for the next couple months.
I wanted to thank you for the presentation on the class size research and looking into the whole idea of class size and how it does affect student achievement. And I was getting ready to say, are we sure we want to do away with the assessment position, Director of Assessment, if in fact the thinking is perhaps class size alone is not as important in student achievement, but rather assessment, use of data, assessment for learning. And yet I hear what you say when you say, well, if we're going to be back here in a year doing this again, that's not fair to the district, to the individual. So I guess my comment is, the more I hear and the more I hear about the thought that has gone into all of these suggestions, the more I learn. And I just thought it was very interesting that with the data on class sizes, I had never thought about it this way, but we are in fact the lowest, we have the lowest class sizes in the surrounding area, and yet we don't have the highest scores. So something else is going on there. And if in fact it is assessment, then we certainly want to pursue that. But having said that, you know, we may be here again next year. So I applaud you for all of the work and all of the careful thought that's gone into it, and in trying to educate both the board and the community on all of the different factors that go into every single one of these decisions. One of the things that jumped out at me when I was reading all of the comments from the public is that we don't have the whole picture. Certainly not us at the board, and certainly not the public well-meaning. I mean, lots of things seem very simple. Cut salaries across the board, everyone's doing it. But there are so many other things that go into that that isn't always possible. So I appreciate, as Mrs. Davies said, the process of getting us all of the input from the public. It was excellent to have every word, and good luck.
Dr. Krizik, I'm going to just leverage off of one of Mrs. Deroni's comments. I mean, one of the things that was added was this position to help evaluate the data. And some consistent feedback we saw from the staff members in the district is trying to understand how valuable the data is that we're really capturing. So what that might, to me, indicate is we really need to understand how we're using the data. So can you just talk a little bit about, I guess, your concerns for eliminating that position? You know, obviously it's an ad in the administrative office. It was something that we had a lot of discussion when we approved that additional headcount, understanding how we'd use it. So I would just like your feedback as far as how you think this is going to impact the district?
Up until a year and a half ago, we had very few, I'll say, common data points of which to evaluate. Our conversations were dominated around the ISAT, and teachers were sick and tired of talking about the ISAT because it wasn't helping to inform instruction. That they didn't get the data until students were gone, it was the beginning of the school year. It doesn't help to change instruction. We have put some assessment structures in place, and we're working towards looking at assessment a little bit differently, and some levels are a little bit more ahead of the game than not. For example, a couple things. One is that we now have some measures of academic progress map data. I don't know that we have fully harnessed with our staff how to most effectively use that data, because that data is given in real time, and how that data can be used to make instructional changes. But map data is also a good predictor of PSE performance. It's better aligned with PSAE performance than the ISAT is. So if we know that students are performing, between below the 50th percentile, the 60th percentile on map data, we know that there may be some underlying issues for that particular student and or for the way we deliver instruction or content or what is missing. So we do know that we do need someone in a strategic leadership role, I'll say, to conduct data retreats, to help staff be comfortable with the data, understand and use the data. We've given the Explore test for I don't know how many years, certainly before I got here. And that test was primarily perceived as one to being used only for the high school for placement in courses. It's a very powerful data tool, because the relationship between the data on the Explore is a predictor of how a student's performance is on the plan, and then the plan connected to the ACT. So we know that students who are performing below a 15 on the Explore are not likely to achieve an ACT score of even as high as 21. If we don't begin to intervene or do something differently, we know that we don't extend our options. But middle schools who have used that Explore data look backward mapping and saying, what can we do differently in the 6th grade? What can we do differently in the 7th grade? What can we do differently in the 8th grade to affect the outcome of those scores? Because that has an impact for students as they go along the way. The high school departments are beginning to work on common assessments as a way of, how are students doing with achieving common learning targets? That data will be used to help drive instruction. We have Ames Web data, which is a progress monitoring tool. And how we begin to use common assessments in the elementary and middle school to make instructional choices and decisions is key as well. And so because this year, Mrs. Ostojic, we are just using this year as giving our leaders, department chairs and principals, a year-long training on being the assessment leader in their building, and then having a two-day retreat for small groups of staff from each of the schools. I'm not so sure that we have fully, I'm not so sure that staff has fully understood the full impact of assessment, because I'm not so sure we put the professional development piece in place to help them do that, and or give them a framework in terms of how to optimize the use of data. So I can understand, in looking at some of the staff feedback, how they don't necessarily see that as useful. I can say that had we had this person on staff several years ago, we would have seen not just ISAT trend data, but we would have looked at our Explore trend data, we would have looked at our plan trend data, and there is nothing, no matter how magnificent our teachers are in the 11th grade, if we don't start intervening earlier. There was no magic that they were going to do in the 11th grade to turn an ACT score from a 21 to a 24 in a given year. That there needed to be something a little bit more strategic done on that. So, I think we're trying to lay some of the foundational work to helping at least our building leaders understand data and how to use data, and then potentially lead those discussions with staff.
Mr. Collins.
I'm glad to hear this discussion that we're having about the Director of Assessment, because I think that brings up an important point, that we cannot, even though we're cutting money from the budget, we cannot lose sight of the fact that we must continue to improve the quality of education in our school system. And one question as it pertains to that director of assessment, when we think about that, I just think of the salary, but I also know that we're deferring implementation of quite a bit of technology as part of our budget.
Well,
How much of that would pertain to that director of assessment?
David, can you answer, is that a question that you can answer about, looking at a tool that, a data warehouse solution? Can you maybe better answer that? How much we had maybe budgeted for a data warehouse solution and whether or not we're anticipating that going forward?
In the proposed technology budget for next year, the amount of money that is actually earmarked, it's still in the technology budget, is $100,000 for a data warehouse solution. That's a budgetary placeholder based on some systems that we've reviewed and gotten some preliminary quotes on. So that's kind of an amount that we hope would be enough to get an implementation started. And then, of course, annually after that, there will be some ongoing, support and maintenance costs that we'd have to incur for the system itself.
Okay. So could I then safely, just for my own thought process, just look at that individual salary as the only cost associated?
I'm sorry, no, my response was strictly on the implementation of the system itself, the licensing.
And what I thought I heard you say, and please clarify, that money for that data warehouse is already in the budget and it's not being deferred.
It is in the budget. It's not being deferred at this point in time.
Okay.
Yeah, because as Dr. Krizik said, we still want to discuss and determine how we might be able to move forward with some of our strategic initiatives in that area, but that remains to be seen how that would be accomplished.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Kralquist.
Dr. Krizik, thank you for your presentation this evening. I agree it's very important, I believe, for the administration, for the school district to outline both the process that you're going through as well as some of the considerations that are under discussion, under debate across the district. I think it's important, certainly for the board, to be able to hear this as we prepare for what ultimately is our decision, which is the approval of the budget in September. But it's important for the public, for the community to hear the discussion and understand the process, as well as for the employees in the district, many of whom live in Elmhurst and others who do not. I also recognize that that in trying to prepare that budget that the board will need to approve in September, there are some decision dates that impact staffing that have to be made, frankly, well in advance, and that has to be made, I believe, by March for notification in April and so forth. So that's really, I think, added to a lot of heightened tension as well as the compressed time frame in a lot of the discussion. I also thank you for at the board's request, providing the mechanisms for the public input through the website in particular. As Mrs. Ostojic pointed out, there was quite a bit of material that was included. And a number of, I think, observations that can be drawn from it. One is there continues to be, based on some of the feedback, a fair amount of either misunderstanding or incomplete understanding around some things that ought to be pretty straightforward, and so I think it outlines perhaps some work for us as a district, as a community, to improve our communications or to maybe pick out a few of those themes and strengthen that. You're more than welcome to address that to the extent that that fits into your action plan, but that was one observation. Our core task was interest was to have as a part of the process this invitation for input that would enable you and your organization, the administration, the building principals, the staff, and the like to go through this process of trying to bring that budget in September in balance between revenues and expenditures. A second observation that I had in going through all the information was, as was pointed out earlier, how the stark contrast in many cases on a number of the issues and ideas and programs under consideration and areas for reduction or for revenue generation, how differing, how opposing many of the points of view are, which we would expect. But it is disappointing when there are subjects that could or should have data or some evidence or analysis to support at least a thoughtful debate. And so one question, and I'll just lay out a couple questions and perhaps you can address those, in addition to your plans around communication, would be how to best prepare or to best formulate a process that would lead to either some, not maybe consensus. There may never be consensus around some of the points of view or the value statements around certain programs, but how we get to some of the data. You gave evidence around the elementary foreign language, that's just one. And then the third item, if you could address for me, is that to me was evident, is there were many ideas for you can either call them budget reductions or I'll call them operational efficiencies across the district. Many ideas. Some might be good ideas, some may be less than good ideas, but there were a lot of ideas. How can this district inculcate or adapt or adopt a process for continuing to invite those ideas for operational efficiency, for cost savings, for improved productivity, for and the like, so that we're not faced with, or we can be more proactive, let's say, in preparing for what might be more reductions down the road. Also, so that, frankly, we're in a position where we are able to be as nimble as possible in shifting resources in the district to the parts of a program or staffing or investment where we can generate the greatest amount of value. So if in fact, using the point of discussion earlier around if it's a data analytics position and building some data warehouse capability, if it's improved technology that provides more productivity not only to learning but to teachers, if it is adopting new curriculum, new programs at all the grade levels across the district, we have to quiesce some things in order to secure the resources to shift in other ways. So while we might collectively as a community, as a district, as a board, reach the goal in September of a balanced budget that has prioritized the most important programs and still finds a way to keep the lights on and the bills paid and the like, we want to be able to continue to do that so we aren't in a place of urgency 12 months from now if in fact, as you're foreshadowing, further reductions will continue to be required. So if you can just comment on the communications, the process for keeping idea generation and evaluation alive, and then maybe even specific programs that you would like to go delve more deeply in going forward, like the elementary foreign language, in order to have better better data-supported decision making rather than perhaps emotion.
We were really waiting until having, let's say, this forum to give some rationale before we put out an additional Q&A, because what we didn't want to do was answer some of the questions I tried to address this evening that were certainly questions that the public had. Some of the questions were direct, some were inferred by their comments. So the next step is to, again, try to put together another document, another informational document, to try to take some of these concepts to try to clear up some misunderstanding around some of the key issues. So that's one piece. As I indicated, earlier, is that what we currently don't have in place, Mr. Carlquist, is an educational program review process. Most districts that have that process engage groups in that process. There's representative groups so everybody understands that. So it might be administrators, teachers, PSRPs, maybe community members, and people are, again, a small group. It's not like a large group, and so that you have everybody kind of weighing in on that, and so that when those are brought forth to a Board of Education, again, it has the perspectives from 4 different or 5 different perspectives. That is one process. A second process is that when we look at all of those operational efficiencies, one is, because we don't always list out every operational efficiency that we've already put in place, there is sometimes an assumption that they've not already been taken advantage of, and in some cases they have been. This year we put in a variety of operational efficiencies. But when we see those, we also evaluate the feasibility of those. So for example, when we have someone recommend that, have we looked at all of our transportation routes? And is it possible to reevaluate our transportation routes and go through the IDOT process to determine whether or not they they continue to meet the qualifications of a hazardous crossing? And if they don't, then we'd come forth and bring revised transportation routes to you and deal with that. So, those are some key observations that that things have been brought forth. And we as a cabinet have looked at all of these recommendations and suggestions too. None of them have been dismissed. Some we say we've already done that. Two is that the feasibility, if this is not feasible, the cost to implement this is far excessive than it would be to yield any savings. So we've done that. Another piece is whether or not we continue to have a mechanism, particularly not necessarily just around a budget time, but I think we need to conceptualize, what opportunity can people have, whether we keep a feedback form available on the website for people to identify what they think potentially, not just our cost reductions, but I also think it's equally important to balance, as Mr. Collins said, if our vision is one of educational excellence and making our kids be the absolute best they can, then I equally want feedback on what it is that they think that we should be pursuing to advance this district as best as possible. And so whether or not we have community members that are familiar with things like STEM or Project Lead the Way or a variety of different things that they would like us to explore, or even wonder if we are exploring them, because a lot of conversations happen that never get public because we are in the investigation stage and we're not ready to come forth. But we're also looking at the feasibility in terms of cost, personnel, curriculum implications, how does it align with curriculum review, all of those different pieces. So I think I'd want balanced feedback, not continuing on cost reductions, but what is it that this community really would like us to continue to provide to our students? Again, if it's feasible, to continue to advance us as far as we possibly can, to harness the energy of this unit district and to give every student that goes through our EC12 system the most options when they graduate here.
Mrs. Conroy.
Thank you, Dr. Krzyk. I think that the community input was a huge tool in helping us to get through this process. It definitely helped answer questions, clarify things, and bring more questions to us, and therefore we could bring them to you for more clarification. And that was definitely invaluable in this process. I do feel pretty good about what you brought to us tonight. I think we have a pretty strong compromise here from what we started with. My question for you is, while I value very much and see how our district needs a director of assessment, I have a serious issue with spending money on any new position at this point in the situation that we're in. But my question to you would be that if it were the pleasure of the board to reinstate that position, what would be the offset for that, in your opinion?
There's two things. One is a little bit of the framework that we presented tonight is slightly over the target amount of $2,050,000. So there's about $51,000 there. So where that offset would be could come from a variety of places. I would not necessarily go into that list. But I would, again, look to see, one, if we could, if we looked at, we tried to protect professional development budgets at the school level. We didn't want to abandon professional development budgets. But if we provided in-house professional development on some things, what percentage of a professional development budget district-wide could we reduce in order to capture some of that? Again, not looking to eliminate it completely, but how could we capture some of that through that? That would be, just off the top of my head, one place to go to that we haven't necessarily touched. There are some minor expenses, but they total up. But currently one of the recommendations that had come from the middle school principals is that I don't think we currently pass on the cost of the student planner to students and then, but to pass that on to families. Again, little things sometimes incrementally add up. And, you know, that is just one thought. And, you know, if we have, you know, any retired positions that are support staff position, evaluate whether or not we fill those positions or replace those positions. You know, could we restructure at any point? You know, are there any operational efficiencies? So, you know, there may be a variety of things without giving you a complete total. I think we might have a few places to look. Again, I want to say that we tried to, you know, just as much as we tried to maintain in this budget that we presented to all of you to continue the advancement of the purchase of curriculum materials, we also sought to also value professional development, because we saw that too in the past, that went away and it wasn't strategic and it wasn't targeted, and that would be doing a disservice to our staff. But just as we are cutting professional development for administrators because we have found another avenue to provide that, we might be able to do that for staff as well. That's just a couple options, Mrs. Conroy.
In terms of our decision process, can you bring something to us to show us what that might look like?
We can.
Ms. Hirsch.
Thank you, Dr. Krizik, for the presentation. I think it was very informative, some new things that we saw tonight. I also want to thank you for putting the feedback piece mechanism in place, and thank you community members who gave us your input and your feedback. It's definitely been very helpful in providing some guidance and advice and demonstrating what your values are to us, which is very helpful in making our decisions. I have one specific question, Dr. Krizik. Can you please help me understand? I'm not sure that I have a complete understanding of the reading recovery consortium fees for $14,000. It's my understanding that it's just will no longer be members, and I'd like to understand the implications of that for this year as well as moving forward and how it affects our teachers, the resources they have access to, and those types of things.
Dr. Sullivan, would you like me to answer that, or would you like to answer that?
What the Reading Recovery Consortium fee, not paying that fee, would not allow us to send teachers to reading recovery training. We couldn't technically call ourselves a reading recovery site because you have to pay that fee in order to do that. What we do know is that the Plainfield Consortium is in a bit of an upheaval. They're very tied to state funding, and they are unclear where they will be in terms of state funding. They are also in the process, if you been following the newspapers, of the proposal to eliminate all 29 of their reading recovery teachers in Plainfield. So my discussions with the people at the consortium is they're not clear whether or not there will even be that consortium for next year. We're not even sure that the $14,000 that we've had budgeted, it's always, like I said, the fee itself is never determined until the last minute because of their state funding, how many people belong, et cetera. We're not sure that that would even cover it. They have no idea right now what's happening. What we've been told is that we would have the option within the next 2 years to get back into the consortium that would not require our teachers to go back and get any additional training. After that, if we chose to go back in, they would have to go through the more rigorous reading recovery training.
I guess a general question is, my impression based on feedback and based on talking to people is that the Reading Recovery Program is a very valuable program. It's a very helpful aid for students who are first graders. So I guess I'm confused. Is it that this is a great this is a go forward program for us and we are going to continue to implement it within the district, or this is something that you're questioning in total? Are we going to move forward with this particular program or not? So I'm not sure.
What I've talked to the reading recovery teachers and our reading specialists, they do more than just reading recovery. They do a number of different reading interventions. Is that this would not preclude them doing one-on-one services with those students who need it, using those strategies and skills that they've learned from reading recovery. We just can't call ourselves a reading recovery technical site. So it's also possible, based upon the concerns with the consortium, that it may not be an option, or we'd have to look for a different consortium to begin with. It may not even exist for us in that form for next year.
Moving forward to program evaluation review process, we'd want to look at what the cost of that program is and what our outcomes are, because we do have some trend data with regards to the implementation of the Reading Recovery Program. And that data has been shared with the Reading Recovery specialists. And so we do know that 25% of the, approximately 25% of the students that receive reading recovery instruction move out of the district. So we can't track them throughout the system. We know that 25% of those students are referred for consideration of needing special education services. We know 25% of them continue receiving reading support instruction through their elementary years, and then we know 25% of them receive a great deal of benefit and don't fall into either category of needing continued support or refer to special education. So 25%, we have a 25%, I don't want to say success rate, but of moving outside of any other allocated resources to them. I think what we'd want to do is that evaluate what that cost is and what the benefit is. And while someone can say there's, as long as one child benefits, it was valuable. But if it depends on how much you feel that investment should be. So again, from the time, we've implemented reading recovery a long time ago. Since that time, we've learned a lot about different reading intervention strategies. We're certainly sending a group of teachers to some core training this week too that are also coming back with a variety of different intervention strategies related to reading. We are committed to reading intervention support. What that might look like in the future, again, might be dependent on what is recommended as part of an RTI intervention, a Tier 1, a Tier 2, a Tier 3 intervention. It might be dependent on, how those things are looked like. But nothing in not belonging to the consortium doesn't say, as Dr. Sullivan indicated, that there still might not be one-on-one instruction. Nothing is preventing us from rejoining the consortium. But the cost today of $14,000 could be double or triple that next year, if many districts begin to pull out and the cost of that fee becomes much higher, and whether or not we could even afford that increased fee. So there are those other factors as well related to that. But again, nothing is changing our desire to provide reading intervention at the elementary grades.
I have a larger question, and I appreciate the picking and choosing of options that gets us to our number. But it kind of leaves some of the bigger pieces out there that we haven't addressed at the board table, we haven't addressed as a district. And those are, I'll give you credit, you've been able to pick and choose and avoid pretty much the big, nasty, tough ones that are controversial and not necessarily fully understood and fully vetted. And I think, I think it's something that we should say. The way that I view this is that these are things that the administration brought to the board as considerations for elimination. And so these are things that, elimination or restructuring or however we want to consider it. I think the due diligence is that we look at each of these things that have been proposed on the list, and we get good data around each one of these things, and we have a good, solid, thorough understanding of what it would mean and what the implications are for each one of these things. I think, again, we've talked about where the state is in their funding. I mean, we picked a number, and the conversation, is we need to get to that number in order for our next fiscal year to be able to come up with a balanced budget. That's what the board asked you to do, and you've done that. I think, however, though, we all know that, as Mr. Collins likes to say, it could be deja vu all over again. We're coming back next year. But on a separate note, if there are things in our current implementations of these particular programs that are not effective, that could be more effective, that could be structured in a better way, that could be providing better services, those are things that I would like to see recommendations coming back to the board. So, I view this as we may sit here and go, those big, scary things that everybody has strong opinions about aren't on the table. I want to complete the process with those items.
Actually, the $2,050,000 drove a little bit of this process, to tell you the truth. If that was if that was a 2.5 number, which was the mid-range number that we had looked at this last time, you would have seen, obviously, some additional pieces. Again, in weighing the feedback or the perception, and sometimes, perception becomes individuals' reality. There was this prevailing feedback, take as many administrative reductions, cuts as possible, keep away from instruction, find a better way, do all of that. And so certainly out of respect for that, yes, the way that was structured, we found a way of not directly confronting those. It doesn't mean, Mrs. Hirsch, that we're abandoning, that I or any of my team is abandoning any of those recommendations. It is the number that drove that. And as I indicated earlier, if we're in the same position this year, those items, potentially additional items, would be the same things we would see again next year. Those are compelling pieces that we need to evaluate. Again, we can certainly pick and choose research or pick and choose benchmark districts. We can certainly pick and choose that. What we just tried to lay out for you a little bit this evening in some of the rationale was, things that we may have used as an instructional tool to improve achievement. Unless it's, again, a class size of 15 to 20, it's hard to extrapolate. There's no research to support the extrapolation of that. And it's mixed data, except for if there is any support for, I'll say, smaller class sizes, that would be in the early elementary grades. So all of those things are still up there, so to speak. I think it would have been perceived as insensitive of us administratively to have identified all of the instructional costs, or an imbalance, a perception of an imbalance that all of this was done at the elementary level and not seeing some significant reductions across the level of middle school and high school as well. So I think we've tried to balance a little bit of the feedback that we received, but I don't disagree with you, Mrs. Hirsch, that this board is going to have to wrestle with each of these items, whether it's now or it's in the future, because they're going to keep coming back. And we're going to keep bringing them back to you. Because at some point, we're also going to bring back to you some new expenditures. And the only way for us to implement and new programs may be re-looking at how we're spending existing dollars. And so how can we continue advance achievement? It may mean having to shift resources around and making some changes. So these are going to be recurring things that are going to come back.
I guess what I'm requesting is, the educational review process. I'm not sure that I have the right word for what it is that you're looking for in terms of how you evaluate programs, but I realize I'm not going to ask you for it for next month, okay? But the point is that if these are things that are already of concern or have questions or issues around them in terms of how do you measure the effectiveness of the elementary world language program, that would be one of the very first things I would recommend that the administration tackle in terms of, let's flesh it out, let's figure out what the pros, what the cons, what the benefits are. I think there's been a lot of discussion in the community and understanding what the proposed changes would have brought, what we would have won, what we would have lost. Instructional minutes during the day, in the core curriculum versus, this program. These are things that we are going to wrestle with in very short order.
Absolutely.
And so in terms of the types of an educational program review, I would recommend, my one voice is, my recommendation is that these are the things that should go first in terms of through that process, so that we are prepared a year from now to be able to address some of these concerns, better prepared.
I'm just going to make one final comment. This is a workshop topic, and then I'm going to open it up so we can get some community input on it. But maybe leveraging off of some of the conversation that's happened, I agree. I think the program review is going to be critical. we got a lot of comments saying, again, with the foreign language, and one of the problems with the foreign language is we looked at this, a prior board looked at this prior to the referendum, and at that point, maybe it made it an easy target, but it was, we didn't have any data collected at that point to say how effective is this program. And I remember a conversation sitting as a community member at that time saying, well, maybe we should be spending triple the amount of money on this program, or maybe, you know, it should be less or more, or, you know, it's not a value statement on foreign language. Correct. It's the value statement on the investment of this $500,000 and what it's how it's benefiting our students. So, you know, and that's just one line item. So I think that it's critical to get this program review, and bigger picture, whatever the CPI is, we're going to continue to have to trade off resources. Yes. Earlier this year, we discussed, we saw information on lacrosse and that becoming an IHSA sport. You know, big trade-off on expenses. I mean, with the athletics, we're going to have to continue to look at what we're offering our students, what's impacting the most kids, which ones might be too expensive to continue to maintain. So I think across the board, we're going to have to continue to make these trade-off decisions. And instead of looking at this as this anguishing, oh my gosh, I hope we don't have to do this again. I mean, I think this is something that, as a board, as a district, we're going to continue to have to evaluate how we're using our resources. We don't have an unlimited pot of money. We need to align our curriculum across our schools. We've seen that there's disconnects that need to be resolved. So I think there's a lot of flavors of this conversation that are going to be happening on an ongoing basis. With that, I'll ask Dr. Krizik to take her seat. We'll open up the microphone if there's anybody here that would like to come up and ask a question specifically on the topics here. We'll have another opportunity for public comment at the end of the meeting. And again, usually we have that in the beginning, but we're trying to offer the opportunity for comment after having heard some of the board deliberations. So I would ask you, if you have any questions that we can address on this topic, to come up and state your name and address and then pose your question. Okay, come on up, sir.
My name is Dwayne Tutai. I'm the energy manager for the district. I live at 17W661 Lorraine Avenue in Aston, Illinois. Dear board members, I wish to take this time to bring up a few points on how we can save additional money through the energy saving program. As you know from the letter I sent you, each of you, we have already saved over $6 million in utility spending over the last 7.5 years. As of the end of December 2009, we're almost $500,000 below budget for our utility bills this fiscal year that could be spent for next year. My only job is to save as much money in the utility budget as possible while providing 72-degree heat or 74-degree air conditioning for our students. Utility costs are my only focus. If the board would make decisions to save all utility budget savings for the future deficits, I'm sure that the teachers, custodians, support staff, and administrators will look at their utility usage much closer for the rest of this year. Right now, it is the $4.50, the $12, the $9 savings we achieve in classrooms, multi-purpose rooms, gyms, etc., that add up to the $1 million in savings we have achieved the past 3 years. Why not shoot for even more the second half of this year? For each degree of cooling adjustment we make in the future, or heating, we save an additional 3%. I know that you are planning on increasing fees for outside groups to use our buildings. Please charge them the actual cost of what it takes to heat or cool our facilities. When outside groups use the A building here at York for air conditioning, it costs us almost $100 an hour to cool that whole building. We must turn on the whole building, even if they're only using one classroom. We cannot turn it on and off individual rooms. What a waste of our resources. There are many other areas in our district which could be used much more efficiently. If they must have York, then make sure they pay the $100 an hour. Why should our district utility costs be covering outside groups and thus reducing the taxpayers' money that should be spent on the educational costs? This doesn't make those programs cost neutral to us. I look at your proposed utility fees I see ahead, and I see that the current year you're thinking of moving to $20 an average fee, based on 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. We currently don't use the buildings that way. We use maybe about 280 days at $15 hours a day. If you figure those costs with our utility costs, it should be about $55 an hour, not 20. And that's just an average. Again, higher here at York, smaller at grade schools. Another item I wish to share with you is my disappointment that I've not been approached or asked for my input on what else the energy program could do to reduce costs. As you've seen from my letter, there are many areas of energy costs that I monitor. The skills that I've gathered over the last 7.5 years provide me with a clear history of how each school spends its utility budget. I spent 39 years in this district and know that the $6 million we have saved the last 7.5 years helped retain jobs and programs. Without those savings, we would have had to look at reductions much sooner than this year. I hope as you deliberate over these reductions for next year, you will discuss both the current energy program and what I bring to that program. This program only saves money for the district without reducing any programs or staff. Thank you for allowing me to share this with you tonight.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Dirksheide, and I reside at 301 Addison in Elmhurst. I have 4 children, 3 different schools, twirled jump rope for Hart for 3.5 hours this morning. So I wanted to talk a little bit about class size, having heard some of the discussion, and I really would urge you to dig a little bit deeper on this particular question as you dig a little bit deeper in the future for needs that might arise. You know, to some extent, I hear the message that class size isn't everything, but absent the teacher effectiveness and strategy piece being really strong, if you have small class size, at least you have one of the necessary components to move student achievement. So you might want to consider that. I think that as we look at this block scheduling idea that I heard about in the REACH presentation a couple weeks ago, and in some of our schools where teachers are being asked to reach really heterogeneous groups of kids who have really, really high abilities to learn quickly and digest information, you know, in 2 segments rather than 8, and you have learners with, who are very far below grade level, asking a teacher to take on more children, up to 26 at class level, and be able to reach kids at all those ends of the spectrum. I think we're really asking a lot of them, and whether or not these block strategies will be effective. So at Emerson, for example, we've seen our class sections go from 3 of each grade to 5 in the kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and I think even 3rd grade now. We have 5 sections. So my son's class, for example, has 21, but there are 5 sections. So if you wanted to, ooh, gee, we could go to 4. If we just divided these 20 kids up and fed them there, then suddenly we'd have 4 sections of 3rd grade, and we'd have 26 with learners at a very, very wide band. And I really would like you to dig a little bit deeper into that as you go forward. And just really quickly to dovetail, because some of this information kind of is gleaned from your REACH report a couple weeks ago, I would encourage and second the idea of holding a workshop meeting on that study and having some more opportunity for community comment on that particular very interesting and well done report. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Katie Padberg. I live at 740 East View Street in Lombard, and I'm a teacher at Sandburg Middle School. I just have a few questions for the board and Dr. Krizik. A few school board meetings ago, a parent at a previous meeting asked if teachers are at the ground zero level, should they not be consulted as we move forward with the different cost-cutting and budget item reductions? And just to let you know, groups of teachers have been meeting regularly, and we have many suggestions that we would like to give to help and some solutions we think that we see from building to building. And I guess my question to you then, is there a way that we can constructively discuss this with the board? We have used the 2-question online survey to share our input, but by the same token, we believe that there's some items that may need some clarification from board members or Dr. Krizik. And we would ask, is it possible to ask some of these questions and answer some of the questions that you may have face to face? I think tonight, hearing from Dr. Krizik saying maybe we need to have the stakeholders have a say and be a little bit more proactive so we don't have to react to things in such an emergency fashion. I think Ms. Hirsch spoke to that as well. Could we be more proactive? And I would also say that I believe you too, Mr. Carlquist, has said, you know, how do we get the community input? And I'd like this to be an ongoing discussion. And I guess my question to you then from the board is there any way that we could, as teachers, put forth our suggestions and be able to actually have some discussion besides a kind of one-way survey?
Katie, if I can answer, I'll just answer first. One is, as part of our process, we wanted, we always had an opportunity for staff to give response and input. And as was pointed out earlier, the board received all of those, and there are some good ideas to come forth from those. Some have to be investigated. You know, I certainly would, you know, welcome, you know, having, a representative group of staff certainly meet with, a group of administrators, so that we can at least have a candid conversation and then be able to then summarize and bring forth all of those ideas and/or recommendations, looking at the feasibility of all of them and bring forth that to the board for further consideration. So there's nothing about a hard and fast rule of where the reductions is that it certainly could be more because we might get further gain later on. But, again, I would welcome the opportunity to, certainly, sit down, with a group, and whether that's through an ETC process, whether that however that looks like. But, we also know that our staff is close to different ways of looking at the budget. And that's why we did put the mechanism that we did put in, because we were looking for perspectives from a variety of individuals. And so we didn't want to, because we knew we had a process that we had to move through, so to speak, for some timelines. We certainly hope that some of the ideas that were put forth just sparked additional ideas on behalf of the staff. But we'd be more than happy to sit down and then bring those forth.
Good. Mr. Carlquist.
Dr. Krizik, a term that I don't hear used as often, but I suspect it's in practice in some form or fashion, site-based management, which talks both about empowerment at the building level for decision-making, but I would suspect also reflects a process that Ms. Padberg is addressing as well, which is a communications back to ensure that there's a right level of support for site-based management from central office and the like. Can you just maybe elaborate a little bit more on how the existing process and practices across the district in terms of department chairs, or even, I think, of management, the role of the building principal, their responsibility in soliciting ideas and input? You gave some examples of what I perceive are some incremental practices that are being contemplated and might be deployed as a way of trying to elicit additional ideas and tap into the creativity and the sort of spontaneous collaboration that's going on across the district with some of these ideas. But what are, so the cabinet is here tonight. I mean, does the cabinet talk to the building principals? Do the principals talk to the teachers? Where or how do we take advantage of the strong relationship that exists with our teachers union, for example, and the ideas that come through that process?
In the budget development process, Mr. Carlquist, we do have somewhat of a site-based budgeting process, and building principals around the end of March, beginning of April, sometime mid-April, submit to Ms. Masterton recommended expenditures for each of the line items. It's not a zero-based budgeting process, but she's certainly not considering what was in their budget as a starting point from that point. Unfortunately, one of the problems with that budget is it has a tendency to look at things like materials and supplies and some of the tangibles. It isn't a process where we say, you spent, making this up, $2 million in staff salaries, okay? You're only going to have, again, $2 million next year. Rearrange, work with your staff, move the chess pieces around in order for you to achieve your school improvement objectives. We haven't gotten to that level, I'll say, of sophistication at this point in time, but so we're not there with that particular piece. We would certainly at some point like to be able to say, here's all you have for personnel. You have to figure out support staff, certified staff, all of your staff. You decide what are your priorities in your building and how you're going to meet those needs. Here are your non-negotiables as you do this. But you have all the autonomy to come up with other strategy as long as you meet those non-negotiables, so that someone doesn't come forth with a set of recommendations that would not be acceptable. I can't give you a specific example, but that would be. So there is in the budget development process an opportunity for building principals to get and solicit feedback from their staff, what that looks like in each building, how extensive that is. It might look different in every building. Certainly as we go forth with budgetary conversations, we can certainly have that conversation as a group of district leaders to say what's worked, what's successful, how do you engage, because district leaders can learn from each other too in terms of the processes that they put in place. So there is that first level. If there are things at the building level that staff see, then those things should go to the building principal, okay? And, certainly if, the building principal feels that, that those things can be accomplished and or done, in most cases, we do have a system of checks and balances, and they generally bring those things forward and saying, here's what I'm going to do, here's what I would like to do. In most cases, I will say we usually get recommendations for increased expenditures, not for decreases in expenditures. But that's all balanced over time, and there is a give and take. And there are different priorities in different years as it relates to different adoptions. In some years, there's more money put in some things than in others because of the cycle of things. But there is a process to happen at the building level. There can also be a process that is, at the district level. We have not used the district leadership team as a format for teasing out all of those, but that is a framework to discuss some ideas for reductions at that level. It's a structure that's made up of, 8 ETC members and 8 district members, and we meet on a monthly basis. That could be, now I'm not, whether it's this year or next year, another vehicle and mechanism for those things to come forth and to be discussed. Because we're always building our agenda, and it includes a variety of different things and topics. So, and that agenda has evolved over the past year and a half, where we're discussing, I think, more substantive issues. So that's another opportunity to harness that relationship as well. In addition to whether or not a group of staff either chose to meet with a group of cabinet members, or there was a dialogue that, it would always include building principals. I would certainly not want elementary staff to come forward without elementary principal being there, and or middle school staff not to be there, and or for the high school staff to be there. Because, I do think that they all possess a wealth of information that really just adds an added richness to the conversation.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christina Schumacher. I live at 580 West Armitage, and I'm in 8th grade. I go to Churchville Middle School. Although it wasn't brought up in today's presentation, I'd like to talk about the proposed cut that removes all 8 buses from Churchill, Bryan, Sandburg, and York. I really think this idea is just not in the students' best interest. Many students, such as myself, have parents either working full-time, having a long commute to Chicago, or having parents too busy to pick them up from the after-school activity, especially in the wintertime. Like detentions, a lot of people go, but if they didn't have a ride home, I guess less people would go. Another reason we should not get rid of late buses is not only the sports, but also the clubs, activities, and even schoolwork that would be affected as a result. Now, I'm only in 8th grade, and I really don't know how late buses work at York, but that is where I'm going next year, and I know there are so many amazing opportunities there. I wouldn't want to miss out on these just because of a bus not being able to take me home. We could be finding our lifelong careers with these sports, clubs, and activities. Many students, as far as I know, in middle school stay after for either study hall to take a test or to get help in class. Taking away the late buses will cause those students who take a bus and live a mile or more away to not get this extra help they desperately need. All of the after-school activities are so important to my fellow classmates and I just don't want you guys to take away this important piece of our growth and education. Thank you.
Can you repeat your first name again, please? What?
Christina.
Jenna?
Christina.
Christina, I'm sorry, Christina. The good news is that what we reviewed this evening did not include a reduction in the late buses for next school year. So thank you for sharing those comments and that perspective about how valuable they are. But while it's certainly not off the table, because again, as one of the board members indicated earlier, they would still like to talk about a variety of different pieces that are on there, but it wasn't on there for this evening. But thank you for sharing that perspective.
My name is Kathleen Traxler. We met at the last meeting. I live at 326 Cayuga here in Elmhurst, and I work as a health assistant in the district. Those of us that work in health services in the district are confused tonight. We're not clear exactly what the proposal is presently and how it affects us and so many others employed in the district as well. The initial proposal was to eliminate health assistants and to hire nurses, and that this would be a cost savings measure. Tonight, personally, I've sat and I'm confused if you're still looking at eliminating the health assistant position or not. The previous proposal showed eliminating health assistants and proposing $139,000 savings. The proposal tonight talks about restructuring health services, and it shows a $0 amount. So probably, I don't know if it's because this is near and dear to my heart and the hearts of my fellow coworkers, but I'm having a hard time understanding what the present proposal is. Could you help us out?
It was always framed as a restructuring of health services, and what I tried to elaborate on this evening was is that while there would be an initial savings over time, it was a diminishing reduction over time, that at some point in time the cost of hiring school nurses and or RNs in replacement of the health aides would at some point be at a cost that we currently have now, or maybe a slightly higher cost. There have been no decisions this evening, and all we tried to frame out, or I tried to frame out this evening, was here were some options for the board's consideration to reach the $2,050,000 mark. They still have a couple meetings, or however long they would like to spend on it, deliberating on which of the options that had originally been presented, what they would like to go forward with or not go forward with. All we did this evening was just frame out a possible plan. The reason that you saw the zero is that it was the restructuring of health services was not included in this, again, template plan for this evening. It doesn't mean it's nothing's off the table. Again, it was just framing it to help everyone understand that the original amount of reduction options was $2.9 million, a little close to $3 million. But we have a target now of little over $2 million. So there's $1 million leeway. And so, I know that there's this sense of confusion, but until this board further deliberates on each of the items in terms of what they would or would not like included in their reductions, there are no decisions, because there aren't any specific recommendations that were made this evening. Just a concept, only a concept of what it would take to get to the $2 million.
So, if I understand, if I may paraphrase then, the board still needs to vote by March 9th as to whether or not eliminate the health assistant position.
The board needs to come to consensus on whether or not they think it's value added to restructure in a different way than we currently have, and as a result of that restructuring, what that would mean for the existing positions. Yes, they still have to have that public conversation.
It's been confusing, and I don't know if there's just so many personal opinions that have been floating around. It was, I think, almost felt like reassurances were given to not to worry, that they don't really think that they don't really believe that the health assistant position will be eliminated. So I guess it's caused confusion, and I think there's still so much disruption amongst workers, because if our position is eliminated, the bumping process starts. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to that a little bit. If that starts, I think as it was previously pointed out, more expensive employees are replacing less expensive employees with less seniority. So is that still being thought about?
What I can speak to is, obviously there's angst for any of the positions that could be potentially impacted, and to Dr. Krizik's point, there hasn't been any board discussion to say, here's what we would support as a board, here's what we wouldn't. What Dr. Krizik did tonight was present to us things that fit within that $2,050,000 line item. So some items were not included in there, but as a board, we're going to have to sit at the table and make the determination as to whether these are the specific things that we're going to support as a recommendation, or if we're going to look at some of the other things that were, to Ms. Hirsch's point earlier, some of the other things that weren't in this specific listing. I can't really speak to specifics of trade-off of positions, and maybe I'll pass it over here, but as to the board process, and again, I understand the angst of anybody in the district whose positions could potentially be impacted by this cut, as it would be in, in any company that's making reductions, or any employer that's making reductions. So I'm going to ask somebody over here to respond to the.
Just in the process of any reduction, obviously we'd utilize our seniority list and work through processes within the collective bargaining agreement for how we go about determining those, the reductions, if those are actually what the proposals and what the suggestions are that we're going from. We would use our process, which is in place through the agreements, and our seniority list, which is published by category.
Okay, well, I thank you for giving us these few minutes right now. Up to this point, with the presentation tonight, it was very confusing. So,
I would just say, if there are any follow-up questions, I would certainly encourage you to meet with Meg, meet with Mr. Blatchley, meet with all three of us. We certainly would be happy to answer all the questions we can answer. And that really is part of what this process is all about too. We're still available to answer some questions. So if there are some additional questions that we can answer, again, we can't speak for the board. The board speaks with, one voice ultimately when they vote on something, but we'd be more than happy to try to help answer maybe some of the questions that might be a little bit more confusing.
Well, thank you. I have a feeling people will be putting their heads together and coming up with lots of questions for you. Thank you for your time.
Hello, my name is Nancy Knight. I live at 345 Alexander Boulevard. I too have children, three children in 3 schools. I came this evening because I thought that the preschool or before school busing for middle school music was on the table, and I just wanted to address that briefly. And also, I was in a previous life a director of budgeting, so I understand your angst tonight and all the emotions that are flying back and forth. I've been there. You're not in a good place. I wish you luck. But discussing the preschool music program, we've heard from Ms. Krizik many times at every orchestra and band event. The music is important, and my fear is that we won't cut the program, we'll cut the legs out of the program. So please, if you're going to consider cutting the busing before school, understand that that will impact many kids. It might not impact Sandburg, it might not impact Bryan as much. It will probably impact Churchville the most. That busing, as the young lady stated, is very important for many kids. It might not impact my kids directly, but it would impact their peers, and we do feel that busing is very important. And if you're going to keep the music program, please don't cut its feet off. Get the kids there in the morning. Thank you.
Dr. Krizik, I think we can move forward with the next part of the presentation. And again, there's one more opportunity for public comment, the official public comment at the end of the meeting, and we will leave the sign-up sheet until the end of this workshop topic. Thank you.
As Ms. Masterton is walking over to the podium, as the first phase in the process of making any changes to our facility fees, she's just outlining the presentation. This potentially would come forth in the form of a recommendation to the board at a subsequent board meeting. So this is just the first initial public presentation of our current facility fee structure and a proposed facility fee structure. Ms. Masterton?
Good evening. The goals of this presentation include an overview of the facility fee review process that we undertook, a review of the current fee structure and schedule, and recommendations for facility fees. The total facility fees that we received in fiscal 08-09 was $84,100. The current fee schedule of $5 that is in Group B per day was based on some 1981 calculations. And that was for the utility cost per hour in 1981. Our facilities fees rank lower in comparison to our benchmark unit districts. Our average elementary gym rental to nonprofits is $19.41 an hour versus our $5 per day. Average high school gym rental is $59.33 per hour versus our $5 a day, and middle school, in just the high school at $59.33. I think we had a number, but we didn't put it into this presentation. Our current fee schedule is not cost neutral at all. Just alone on the utility costs, without the inclusion of labor and material costs to clean after the use of the facility, those are all far higher than our room charges. And just as an FYI, we do not specify at District 205 the difference between middle school, high school, or elementary gymnasiums. So, the goal of the changes to facility fees were pretty simple. At a minimum, provide District 205 with the cost-neutral income for our facility usage. That was one of our goals. The second goal, to continue to offer space for groups affiliated with District 205 at low or no cost to encourage viability and participation. 3, to gather income from groups that charge fees or are for-profit, as would any other business, and 4, to gain additional revenue to improve the district financial outlook, which we've been talking about for at least a month now. So here's our current fee structure. Our rental rates are based on 4 groupings. Our first group is Group A. Those are Elmhurst School District affiliated groups and educational organizations, including PTA, booster groups, Surge, etc. Group B is the Elmhurst not-for-profit groups, YMCA, Elmhurst Airborne, Kiwanis Lions. Group C are educational organizations not affiliated with Elmhurst or Elmhurst 205, such as COD, Kindercastle, DuPage Dance Academy. And Group D are for-profit groups or groups completely outside of Elmhurst and not affiliated. Rental groups A and B represent 85% of all of our bookings. And here's our current fee structure. As you can see, there is no charge for room fee for rental Group A. They have a charge for the technician, and it's solely the labor charge, and it's only as needed. The same applies to supervisory, it's if needed, and supervision is generally limited to groups of 50 or more. And there, the supervision charge additional. Weekend or custodial charges may be waived, and usually are waived for groups in the A group, and sometimes are for the B group as well. if the group is a frequent user and they have shown themselves to be a conscientious user of the facilities, we oftentimes will make sure that they have a key to the building or they have a pass card to one door to the building for the specific time that they're going to be renting. And that allows us to not have to have a custodian come in and do the work, and it also allows us to not have to charge them for the custodians to be there to open up and close. So the $5 booking utility fee is based on the 1981 calculation and based on $630,133 annual utility costs for all buildings, divided by 14 buildings at that time, divided by 365 days, divided by 12 hours. There was an average of $5.14 per hour. And obviously, that's not when we don't use our buildings 365 days of the year, and we don't use them for 24 hours. But this was, what we wanted to do is show the comparison between 2010 costs for utilities versus the computation that was laid out in 1981 that the $5 fee was based on. And even furthermore, the $5 fee was based on an hourly rate, and it ended up being a daily rate. So they were already starting behind the 1981 level by just doing a $5 daily rate. So the 2010 comparable calculation ends up with $2,335,000 in annual utility costs for 13 buildings, 365 days of the year, 24 hours is $20.50 per average hour. So we're moving on now to our recommendations. It would be our recommendation for Group A that no change be made to the current fees. These organizations' close association to the district encourages parents and community members to support our schools, and we feel that charging a fee may compromise their growth and viability. So we would ask no change to the Group A at this time. For organizations in Group B, we recommend an increase in fees to help allay the costs of utilities. Following the logic in 1981 of the $5 a day, we would suggest moving it up to $20 a day for the bookings in Group B. And the kitchen going up from $50 to $150 a day. That will help to deal with the specific cleaning requirements needed for a kitchen after use. For Group C, as you can see, we have raised rates anywhere from 150% to 300%. These are the groups that do charge. And we would move classroom weekday from $15 to $45 and weekend from $20 to $60. The gymnasiums, we haven't specified elementary, middle school, or high school, but we would move that from $50 to $150. And cafeteria, commons, or auditorium use from $250 to $500. Study hall, LRC, $100 to $200. These are continuing to be daily rates. Forum room, $200 to $300. The computer labs from $25 to $100, particularly because of the importance of the equipment in the computer labs. The field house from $500 to $750, and the kitchen from $200 to $300. And for Group D, which are outside groups who do charge a fee, completely outside of Elmhurst and or charging a fee, a for-profit group, weekday goes up from $100 to $150, weekend from $100 to $150 for classrooms, gymnasium $100 to $250, cafeteria, commons, and auditorium $500 to $600, study hall, LRC to $200 to $300, forum room $400 would stay the same at $400, computer lab also staying the same at $400, field house from $1,000 to $1,500, kitchen from $200 to $400, and Sunday surcharge stays at $100. The summary of facility fee recommendations for fiscal 10-11, increase the fees as follows. Group A, no change. Group B, increase the $5 utility charge to a $20 utility charge, and kitchen fee from $50 to $150 per day. Group C, increase room fees from 100 to 300%, add $45 room charge for the district office conference rooms that are in frequent use now. In Group D, increase room fees from 50 to 200%, add a $150 room charge for district office conference rooms. We would also suggest redefining the organizational groupings. There's 2 or 3 different groups in Group A that we would suggest moving over to Group B. And the impact of these facility fee recommendations would be a net increase of $168,200. We already receive $84,100, taking into account approximate loss of bookings at 5 to 10%. We believe we would still net $168,200 per year more than we receive currently. We are not too concerned about the lack of bookings, as we always have an extensive waiting list, and our fees still would be quite a bit less than the surrounding areas. Our next steps would be a formal facility fee recommendation to the board on the February 23rd meeting. Communicate that change of fees that would be effective July 1st of 2010, and reevaluate the fee structure on an annual basis. We would like to move to an hourly fee schedule format in the future, with rates that are closer to what is being charged at other facilities and at other school districts. We felt, however, that the increase needed to do that we needed to do in 1 year was simply too substantial. And of course, we are cognizant of the fact that groups that use our facility will have to make changes to their budgets to accommodate these increases. Therefore, we chose to take a little bit more conservative approach to it by phasing it in over a few years. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Mr. Carlquist.
Thank you, Ms. Masterton. Actually, this is a subject I've been asking about for a number of years to be revisited, including your predecessor, so I think this is the right thing to do. I think this, the way that you've approached it, it makes great sense to compare to the market, to update the rates and the like. A couple questions. One is you talked about the analysis, and I thought I heard you say, which was not in the back material, but you referenced the 5 to 10% expectation in terms of reduced bookings as a result of the increase in fees. Is that just was just a planning estimate, or do you have any indication, or has there been any discussion with any of the agencies that are renting today, particularly those that are generating the lion's share of the 86,000 existing revenue stream, in terms of their ability to digest the increases?
I actually it was more in the Group C and Group D areas where we would be moving from 1,000 to 1,500, et cetera, that I thought perhaps we might be, tipping certain groups out of that. We've had groups that come in that request, for instance, churches or drama groups that have requested use of our facilities, and sometimes when they find out what our fees are, they say, oh, well, we can't afford that, and so that's it. So I could see that in those circumstances we might lose a couple right now that we have right now that are kind of a little bit iffy on that. But as far as the $20 daily fee in particular, I truly don't believe that we'll be losing anything, because as I said, we do a lottery every year, and we have literally requests all year round for additional facility use. So
my next question was going to be along those lines of is there any data that's collected during the course of the year of those kinds of inquiries about the use of the facilities where someone perhaps is turned away or either turned away because at that time or at that moment or that semester there is not facility availability, or alternatively there's some kind of feedback that says we're priced out of the market, right? Oh, I could use it if it was in this range, but it's not. Is that information collected at all? And maybe, because I can see where, depending upon certainly the category that one falls into, there's a big difference between $20 or $1,500, for example. And I'm just wondering whether just as you're revisiting the fees, whether the categorization either by A, B, C, D, or even daily fee versus here's an hourly fee, here's a half-day fee, or a full-day fee, because to use a gymnasium for an hour for 20 seems like a deal. To use it for a day seems like a steal, right? Can you comment on that?
Well, I think a big part of some of the reasons why the fees are the way they are, and you probably even have a better historical emphasis on it than I do, but in some ways, from what I've understood, that part of the reason why the fees have been the way that they've been is in a way a reward to the community for their support in referendums in the past in building the gymnasiums and saying, here's something that you can share in with us. And the groupings are not just groupings in terms of dollars, they're also groupings in terms of priority. So what ends up happening is that obviously the school district and the school district needs and any educational programs that are going on or athletic programs that are our programs are going to come first in there. But Group A then comes after that, Group B after that, and then if there's anything left over, it's Group C and Group D. So there is that actual priority, and I've twice had inquiries from Group Cs and Group Ds, in particular churches, looking for usage of the gymnasiums or an auditorium for a service on a Sunday, and we're booked. And so those are, you know, I mean, it's a really nice amount of income to get in, but on the other hand, you have to look at it and say, there is that thought that the community does have an ownership of these buildings, and they should be able to use them.
I think you described it very well, and that is there has been historically a feeling by the board, and I feel very strongly that these are the community's assets, and that it's one thing to rent for costs, to defray the real costs that, as a district, we're experiencing, you know, in our budget, utilities, supervision, custodial services, and the like. But the taxpayers have paid for the facilities, and they should be, when they aren't in demand or in need to support the educational program of the district, should be available at those reasonable costs to organizations, particularly those that are supporting the educational mission and those that are that taxpayers have funded and would like to make use of. And I think you explained that very well. My last question is, it's perhaps maybe a little bit easier to focus on the setting the fees and to crunch the numbers in the spreadsheet and see what the added revenues might be, assuming that there isn't a lot of dropout. But I'm wondering if in the work that you and your team did to bring this forward, there was some evaluation or assessment of the overall process for managing these resources and even the billings. And as a for instance, you know, consideration of things like annual billing, cancellation fees. We talked earlier this evening about expense reductions, and that translates into staffing and headcount, and to do invoicing, to collect the receivables, to follow up with the buildings, to do centralized calendar management of every classroom, every gymnasium across, you know, every building in this district. I don't even want to venture a guess how much is consumed within the district. There may be thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars of savings with some process reengineering or some better tools. Can you just talk about what considerations you've contemplated?
The current calendar program that we have is a very efficient program, and we've been looking at it during this year, and we've kind of gotten sidetracked a little bit with other concerns, but we've been looking at it this year in terms of the capabilities of the programs. I can access, you know, numerous different areas in terms of what the charges are and how we can charge things and what we do with things and doing reports on that and everything else. What we haven't really done is been really efficient, as you said, about the way that we bill. Right now what happens is my secretary bills once a month and somebody over at the high school bills once a month, and maybe those charges are correct and maybe they're not, and my secretary has been working diligently to try to pull that all together. And we have also have been discussing, and I'm going to try to implement it, an online requisition system, so that rather than getting a piece of paper that's got 15 dates and 4 of them are crossed off and everything else, you know, the people that go in there to make the requests can see specific rooms that they're requesting and what it's being used for, if it's private in terms of the district or, the Board of Education or anything like that, it's just going to show that it's used. But in terms of other groups or what's available or what's not available, and so what we end up having to happen, which is a big problem, is we get a request for certain gymnasiums. And those gymnasiums have already been used. And then we send a rejection back and say, no, you don't have that. And then they come back and say, well, what about this gym? And then we go back on that. Well, what about these days? And we go back and forth and back and forth. So that's something that we do need to change completely. So yeah, we're working on it.
Any other board? I do have one question. Not listed on here is a resource here in the high school, the pool. Do we offer our pool as a rental to anybody? Is that something we should think about?
There are two resources here that we haven't discussed yet, and we still have to get some data on, and we'll bring it back to the board at a later date. The pool is certainly one of them, and whether or not we want to do that, it's often use, though. So, and for different practices and programs and everything else. The other one is our stadium, and we're currently doing some investigation as to what other districts with similar facilities are charging, and taking a look at that. Mr. Rudder has already sent an inquiry to Dr. Krizik, and we're starting that discussion as well, and those will probably bring separate, but definitely before July 1st.
Just one last overall question, comment. In the community feedback, we got a lot of different recommendations on sponsorships and things like that, and there's nothing assumed in here, and I guess I would caution assuming that somebody's just going to throw a bag full of money at us, but are we pursuing any kind of opportunities, and should we be able to enhance our revenue opportunities for, whatever it might be, or will there be some offset on one of these other cost reduction items?
I want to be really cautious because in Illinois there's some very specific rules about what we can and we cannot do in terms of sponsorships. And so, yes, I did see that on there. I haven't gotten to it yet, but I think we have to have a discussion with our attorneys to say what can we do, what can we not do, how do we solicit that. Usually what ends up happening is you have to have some kind of well, if you're going to do it in this gym, then if, for instance, for Pepsi, then you have to do Coke over at this gymnasium and those kind of things. So we have to get all the rules and regulations in terms of that. But yes, it is something. There were a lot of good suggestions from the community, and we really are looking at all of them, particularly for the revenue enhancement part of it.
Seeing no other board, Ms. Hirsch?
Just one quick clarification. It was in the backup materials, but I don't know that it was posted and not covered in the presentation. But can you just address the Scouts and what group they fall into?
The Scouts fall into Group A.
Okay, I'll ask Ms. Masterton to come back and take a seat. This is a workshop discussion, so if there's anybody here who has a question on the fee presentation. I see a hand in the back. You can come up to the microphone. Please start with your name and address.
I'm loud enough that I'll come to you. Hi, I'm Amy Engstrom-Klug. Nice to see you.
You are low, but we need your recording for that.
How about now? Hi, I'm Amy Engstrom-Klug. I reside at 405 Alexander Boulevard. Thanks again for hosting this. Dr. Krizik, we asked you to find a better way. We appreciate the efforts you're making toward that end. I'll start with that. I realize we've not dodged the bullet and that everything is still up for discussion, so I applaud your continued efforts. One question I have about the overarching presentation earlier is, I understand that there are some verbatims available from the research data. I'm interested in finding out if A, that's available to the public at a future date, and if there's any quantitative opportunities to kind of sort and gather that data. I can tell you that I lead a marketing research class here at Elmhurst College, and I can deploy 6 students for the total sum cost of $0 to that end. But my question on the fees is this. I coach basketball for the YMCA. If you ever see 9-year-old girls play basketball, that's worth the price of admission. Did you share the recommended fee structure with any of the potential, suitors, if you will, to even know if this is an increase that they can tolerate? I don't know that the YMCA can withstand a 4 times increase over their current fees, or if that simply will actually be a revenue loss because we might lose, for example, them as one of our possible benefactors. So I'm interested in finding out if you've shared those proposed costs with any of the groups you talked about.
No, we did not. We feel confident that we have enough other opportunities and other requests from many other groups that if one group had to cut down or reduce, another group would be able to take its place. Secondly, we're still much, much less than any other area around or any other facility around. So, the viabilities of programs, we try to take that into effect by being conservative in what we did. We do know 4 times is a lot, but on the other hand, $5 for a whole day or 3 hours or 4 hours or whatever is just not even a possibility. It doesn't even cover anything. And so, we had to make hard choices, but we do feel confident that, given a fair amount of time now, 3, 4 months, 5 months, that everyone will be able to work their budgets in a way that they can manage to do this.
Well, to that end, I would encourage you this, and I think that you said it better than anyone else here, is the groups that you prioritized in A, B, and C represent the prioritization, the payback, if you will, of the investment of the community in the assets that we have here. So if we are in fact, making it cost prohibitive for what might be an A-level partner, I would hope you would adjust accordingly. So I encourage you to circle back and see if those recommended fees are in fact something they could absorb. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to our superintendent's agenda. We have a consent item on the agenda, and I will accept a motion. Mrs. Davy?
I move that the Board of Education authorize the superintendent or her designee to execute a replacement E-rate rider with option A selected to commence internet service upgrade work, even if E-rate funding commitments are delayed or denied.
Second. Second by Mrs. Conroy. This is money, so we will need to call the roll. Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davy? Yes. Ms. Conroy?
Yes.
Mr. Kralquist?
Yes.
Mr. Collins? Yes. Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Ostojic?
Yes, 7 ayes, no nays, the motion carries. Our next item is public comment. I have a lot of people signed up for public comment. I'm thinking that some of them may have already addressed in one of the workshop topics. So I guess I would ask if you do have public comment that you would like to address with the board, if you could step up to the microphone and just state your name and address.
Hello, I'm Lisa Gerhold, 139 Elm Avenue in Elmhurst. I'm here tonight to share my perspective on the proposed cut of the energy manager position. District 205 wisely created the energy management program in 2002. This is a program designed specifically to save the district money on energy costs by actively managing day-to-day energy usage at each of the district buildings. The program is working. To date, an estimated $6 million+ have been saved, according to Mr. Tutai, the current energy manager for the district. Last year alone, the district was able to save an estimated $1,094,000. That's 34% of what the district would have spent without the energy management program in place. Even with all the new additions to the buildings, the district has been saving around $1 million per year for the last 3 years. So far this year, energy costs are running an estimated $500,000 under budget. I don't think anyone would argue with the benefit of having energy costs managed to the maximum level, especially with these costs expected to rise in the future. It is stated in the list of proposed budget cuts that other district employees would absorb the duties of the energy manager's position if it were to be cut. I encourage the Board of Education to seek answers to the following questions before voting on this issue March 9th. Do these employees collectively have the 20+ hours per week in their schedules to actively manage this program? If not, would some of their current duties be reassigned to allow them the time to take on these important cost savings responsibilities? Do they have the skill sets to do the job? Will the expectations be made of them to maintain the level of savings established by the current program? In the future, if current savings rates are not maintained, will taxpayers be asked to make up the difference? Will more educational programs need to be cut to balance future budgets if energy savings are not maintained? If these duties ultimately get reassigned, the board and the administration need to ensure that this change does not end up costing the district more than it currently saves. It has been estimated that districts that drop the energy manager position end up losing about 30% of their previous savings gains. In this case, based on last year's figures, that total could equal $300,000 or more in 1 year. We can't afford to lose a penny of the savings we have figured out how to gain in the last 7.5 years with the successful energy management program. I appreciate your thoughtful consideration of this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, step up. Please state your name and address.
My name is Molly Rand, and I live at 356 North Myrtle. I'm here tonight to add my support to everything Lisa just said, as well as what Dwayne said earlier, and also to share a few thoughts along the same lines. Please understand that I am in no way here to push a go green agenda at the expense of the extremely important programs that directly affect our kids every day. However, I've been giving a lot of thought to a comment that I believe Mr. Carlquist made at the meeting 2 weeks ago, stating that there are no right decisions, just less wrong decisions. And forgive me if I've totally botched that. That night, I wholeheartedly agreed with that statement, but it's been something that's been on my mind, and I really do believe that there are some right decisions to be made and ways that the board can do the right thing. I'll submit my comments about other potential cuts online, but tonight I want you to know that I think it would be short-sighted and irresponsible for the administration and board to move forward with budget cuts without considering all the small things you can be doing to save money that also can move forward a conservation ethic and standard in this district. And in addition to saving money, doing right by the environment and the world our kids will inherit also gives you an opportunity to lead by example and reinforce the values we are trying to foster in them. Next week, Emerson School is conducting a green audit as a step in achieving our ecology flag through SCARES. I invite any of you to come and join us next Thursday afternoon to learn more about ways that we can reduce our carbon footprint at Emerson, and no doubt these things can be applied at any one of our schools, which ultimately can save the district money and reduce unnecessary waste. I am hoping that you will continue to remember that this doesn't have to simply be about cutting big ticket items. Small things added together can make a huge difference. For example, what about cutting out water bottles at board meetings? I'm sure you all have reusable drink containers that you could be bringing from home filled with your beverage of choice. Or what about having all employees use the Eco font that will enable your printer cartridges to last 20% longer, thus reducing costs and replacing them? Or how about encouraging waste-free lunches so you might be able to cut back on garbage collection? Or how about taking the temperature in the schools down a few degrees in the winter to save on heating costs? Personally, I think 72 degrees in the winter is awfully hot. And I don't know what other schools are like, but if you wear a sweater at Emerson during the winter, you risk passing out from heat stroke. And by the way, these are things that the energy manager position can monitor and enforce. Are we going to get to $2 million in cuts this way? Of course not. But don't forget about the little things. To that end, I found a quote today by Lawrence D. Bell that seemed apropos to this discussion. "Show me a man who cannot bother to do little things, and I'll show you a man who cannot be trusted to do big things." I also want to add that I think that it's very disappointing that this meeting was touted as being a public comment type meeting. The reason that I'm sure many people came and have already left, and we're 3 hours into the meeting and we finally got into public comment. I think it's disappointing that so many people have left when we finally got here. Thank you.
Hi, my name's John Morrissey. I live at 460 Poplar, and I'm going to bring up the important issue, or exciting issue of board norms. I talked about 2 weeks ago. For those who aren't aware of them, norms are the rules that govern the meetings and the relationship between the superintendent and each board member as they put together an agenda and relate, I guess, to one another. And I said 2 weeks ago, it appears on the face of it that the norms, though somewhat innocuous, look like they violate the First Amendment rights of the various board members, and also, of course, restrict our rights as citizens for representation. And also the board's relationship to the superintendent, the way it looks like, again, the board's fiduciary duty is somewhat limited because they can't go to a district employee without first going to the superintendent. Why this is important, well, it's obvious, because they have a sworn duty to the people of District 205. They'll uphold the Constitution, of course, the state constitution and laws thereof. The impact, of course, again, Dr. Krizik, I think she said it in the first sentence today, was what are they thinking of? And oftentimes we, in the past couple of years, have asked that about the board. I think what's odd about this is if you look at the city council, the county board, the state legislature, the United States Congress, they don't have these rules. Nobody's signing off, unless it's probably for national security issues, on what they can and cannot say. There's a minority place on the agendas for in most of these legislative bodies and boards to discuss minority issues, and if you don't have 4 members on this board on the Board of Education, nothing gets on the agenda. So things happen that you may or may not know about as citizens that we end up with results that we don't really appreciate as taxpayers or as parents and students. So I'm asking once again the board to kind of do away with these norms, move back to what the Illinois Association of School Boards uses for their code of conduct. I've been talking to people in the district, and there seems to be some support to go that direction, because I don't know if it's defensible to say that it's okay for you to give up your right of free speech, or it's okay for you to let go a party fiduciary fiduciary duty to the citizens of this community, of this district, in order to make for a smooth operation of a meeting or a collegial relationship among one another. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. I'm just going to go down the rest of the names on the list. At least half of these individuals I know have spoken already, but we'll see if anybody else is here. Valerie Alavosis, Terry Hillen, and Karen Stas. Okay, thank you. Those are our public comments. All the other individuals listed on here have already addressed the board in the workshop topics. Our next item on our agenda is upcoming meetings, and we need to spend a minute talking about, we had set tentatively an additional meeting for February 16th for the specific purpose of board deliberation. So my question to board members is, what is your consensus regarding that? We have a meeting also scheduled for February 23rd, and then the night that we need to make decisions is March 9th. I will remind board members, we've been pulling items off of agendas in order to free up time, even though our agendas still seem to be pretty full. We do have things we need to keep placing on the agenda in the next several meetings, so we will not have an unlimited amount of time for discussion. So I would look for input from the board in regard to the February 16th meeting, and again, the intent for that was to allow some additional time for board deliberation on cuts. Ms. Hirsch.
My question, Mrs. Ostojic, is maybe you can give us some guidance on how you think the board should continue on the deliberation. I think there's one proposal on the table that was provided by the administration in terms of a combination of cuts which, you know, apparently meets the threshold that the board had set. The one thing that the board has spoken on is that we did set a threshold. We're looking to reduce the overall budget for next year by $2,050,000. So the superintendent has put forth a series of recommendations, you know, a combination, if you will, one matrix that meets that. You know, maybe we need to have a discussion on how it is that the board wants to move forward and what kind of deliberations. Do we want to talk about it at an individual item by item basis? Is it something that we want to deliberate, or we have further questions on individual items that are included in that list, that are not included in that list? I guess I'd be interested in either direction or board communication, you know, discussion on how it is that we would like to move forward on making this decision.
The specific recommendations are coming from the people that have the expertise and knowledge of where they can afford to cut, how things are aligning, and that's the way that they've been laid out. What our role is to either determine whether we agree with those recommendations, whether we support them. If there's additional things that we think should be on that list, we should be identifying those and requesting some discussion on those. If there's certain things on there that we don't believe should be on that list at all, that we don't believe we should support, we should be bringing up those conversations and identifying that. Tonight there was put together a package that comes to the number that we need to come to. Obviously, we're going to have to continue having conversations into the future because there were a lot of things not identified on this list. And again, as Dr. Krizik said, it was done through prioritization from various members throughout the district. It was done in a prior meeting. It was discussed through alignment with our strategic plan, which did set values from thousands of stakeholders in the community. And there are adjustments done tonight. And that was based upon additional feedback that we received from stakeholders in the community. So the fine-tuning process has been ongoing. Are we going to look at every potential thing that could be a possible cut and have detailed discussions on it? That's not our role. Our role is to look at the recommendations and decide if we want to support them, or if we are requesting fine-tuning, we should be giving that direction to the superintendent, and then to have the discussion on where we are on this list. I'm sorry, Ms. Hirsch, that's my response. So
I guess I think we need to continue to communicate with the community in that if this feedback mechanism, we've received updates, you know, the feedback that has been submitted up to a certain point in time, which I understand it takes time to collate that and put it together for board members. But I think we need to be upfront and say that this is the deadline, this is the time when we're going to, you know, not be able to assimilate and coordinate any additional feedback before we have to make this particular budget decision. You know, whether we have the meeting on the 16th or not, I think is the question in my head. It's, you know, there's two parts of it. One is the board need further deliberation, and two is, are there other parts of the community that want to have and provide additional feedback? So, you know, I'm very hesitant to not have a meeting on the 16th to provide an opportunity for further deliberation, for, you know, further consideration.
I'd like to hear from some other board members, unless we're letting Ms. Hirsch decide. Mrs. Davy.
It seems to me like we've received a scenario, a presentation from the administration, and I think that we are hearing it tonight. We saw the PowerPoint, but we didn't get the fill in the blank to the PowerPoint until we heard it tonight. I think that we as board members need to take some time to possibly just think about what we heard tonight, overlay it with the feedback that we've read from the community, and that process to receive feedback can be ongoing. But I agree, you do have to put an end point of when we have to say you have to have feedback in by a certain time, and it seems to me like we will have two more opportunities on the 23rd and March 9th to engage with our community before we have to cast a final vote. And because of what you're also saying of how full our plate is with other things, and some of them are intertwined with what we heard tonight, moving the district forward, I think we need to keep going and use our time, you know, allocate our time with this important process as well as other important things going on in the district. So I would see having two more opportunities, plus the 3 we've already had, is 5 opportunities to engage with the community. So I would weigh in on the two more probably being enough.
I guess I would ask, if you don't have any specific comments, if I could get at least a nod of the head on whether we believe that a February 16th meeting, an additional meeting for next Tuesday would be needed. Mr. Carlquist?
I should take a deep breath first. I believe that work expands to fill the available space in large part. I think our meetings are going too long, and we're having too many on a single topic, or there is a risk of having too many on a single topic. I'm concerned that the other needs of the district that the board needs to and should be involved in may not be suitably attended to if we continue to if we continue to remain on a single theme. At the last meeting, in response to a question, Dr. Krizik went through a litany, a rather extensive litany of business items that are on the Cabinet's agenda and are appropriate even for the board's consideration deliberation. This evening, there were ideas that were generated by board and by staff members in the discussion that could themselves be topics that we could delve into. I mean, so I think there's plenty of things to spend our time on. But when I kind of come back to what our role, I think, largely on this is the decision point that I talked about at the beginning, which is the end of September. We'll approve the budget. When the budget comes to us, there's a whole process that builds up, and there's a lot of work that needs to go on. So I don't mean to oversimplify that. Secondly, there's a decision point that'll be put in front of the board in March, which is specifically tied to the subset of items that are on the list that are tied to where there be a requirement for reduction in force. And if the board is going to kind of want to go line by line or employee by employee, that might happen by the 9th. I think that's outside the scope of what we should be doing. I think we gave direction in terms of balanced budget and the scope of what the reductions would be. So I'm not convinced that the meeting on the 16th is necessary on this topic. Maybe for the list of all the other things that we need to address, perhaps that keep getting pushed to the back burner. We talked with our strategic plan about the important need of having balance to how we allocate our resource, which is our time, and have some of it on finance, some of it on constituent stakeholders, some of it on each of the elements of strategic plan. So my suggestion is I think Mrs. Davey laid out, we have 2 more meetings that provide opportunity for public input, provide formal opportunity for discussion and debate. The administration has demonstrated that they've been responsive to individual board member requests for questions or clarification. I think we need to stay focused on what's our job, which is a motion, a decision that put in front of the board for action, and then that which is really the educators. I mean, we all have a kind of a sense of that, but I think our key on this is to reflect the values of the community, to facilitate a process, to invite the public input, which I think has worked pretty effectively, and now that has to be synthesized, as Mrs. Davies said, and I think some deliberation. But there are at least a couple more meetings to be able to do that. If the board would like to meet again, then let's all gather around.
We put together a communication. We put that out there as a tentative date. I'm offering the board the opportunity to make the determination whether they have sufficient time to deliberate. So I'm hearing a no. Yes, you believe you've had sufficient time with those meetings and the meetings that are already scheduled. I hear the same from Mrs. Davey. Ms. Hirsch is opening to having some additional time scheduled. What is the pleasure of the other board members? Ms. Conroy.
Tonight, I think we came to a really reasonable compromise. I feel pretty good about it. I do maybe have more questions that I will want to ask. I want to also see what other community members may have to say in the next week or so. But I don't think that we need the meeting next week. That would be my recommendation.
Mrs. Droney.
I also don't feel we need to meet again on this topic. I don't know what else is on the agenda, but I would also urge, both for our sakes and for the community, that our meetings be a good deal shorter.
If I can echo, I guess, a few of the things that I've heard. I have no problem, as much as I love all the meetings that we have, I have no problem having a meeting next Tuesday, because if in fact we do have a lot on our plate, which I believe we do, let's spread that work out among 3 meetings instead of 2 and end them earlier and be able to give more thoughtful consideration to the work that we do have before us.
I hear your input. The problem is that we would need to line up the presentation. Several of the presentations have been deferred, give them some notice, give the public some notice as to what topics we're discussing. So this date was out there communicated specifically for board deliberation. So if what I'm hearing is that the board members believe that through the conversations we've already got, through the information gathering tools that we have, through the additional time that we have scheduled, that we feel like we've got a good process, we will not schedule a meeting for next Tuesday. So I'm going to move on and just confirm, on February 23rd, we have a Board of Education business meeting, and then Tuesday, March 9th, we have a workshop meeting. We have an action coming out of closed session. Mrs. Davey?
I move that the Board of Education approve to uphold the hearing officer's factual findings that students JR and SR are not residents of the school district because said students are not and have not been residing within the school district's attendance boundaries on a regular fixed basis since they enrolled on September 11, 2009. As a result, I further move that students JR and SR be disenrolled on February 12, 2010, and that tuition be charged from the date of enrollment on September 11, 2009 in the amount of $6,129.60 per student for a total reimbursement of $12,259.20.
Moved by Mrs. Davies, seconded by Mr. Carlquist. All in favor, say aye. Mr. Carlquist. I'm sorry, any board discussion? Thank you. Mr. Carlquist.
Not necessarily specific to this one item, but it is, I think, important for, because it has been brought to the board's attention through the public input and through other channels. Does the board pay attention to and note, and then if so, do something about where there are concerns around residency in the schools? So this is not an action that's being taken related to earlier this evening's discussion. This is not a revenue enhancement action. This is a matter of the district's practice, which is to ensure that students who should be enrolled in Elmhurst schools are enrolled in Elmhurst schools, and if they shouldn't be, they shouldn't be, or they should be seeking permission to be tuition students. And so I know that there have been some questions of the public, does the board look into this, or if there are concerns or questions that are raised, is there an investigation that's conducted to validate residency and the like? And the short answer is yes, there is.
Seeing no other board discussion, all in favor, please say aye. Those opposed? That motion carries. Our next item on our agenda is board communications. Obviously, we have some great news that we received from the last election. The facility referendum has passed. And what that will allow us to do is utilize the space at 162 South York as a flexible space to provide student instruction support should the need arise. There is no specific need at this time identified for that building, but this will allow us the flexibility to use that space as we use the space in the other buildings. I'd be negligent not to thank the many community members who worked very hard to get this passed. Mr. Marquardt was the head of the referendum committee, and I know he and other members of the committee, as well as many community members, worked very hard. So on behalf of the board, I would like, and the administration, express our thanks to those individuals and just our delight that we have this flexibility with the building. Are there any committee updates, any board communications? Just one quick follow-up item. Mr. Carlquist had a request of discussion on TIF, and that was one of the items that we did defer in order to free up more time for discussion on the budget process. So that is something that we are moving to one of the future agendas. Seeing no other board discussion, I will accept a motion to adjourn. Moved and second. All in favor, please say aye. Those opposed? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.